Unfound is a podcast that is now almost 4.5 years old. It has an interview-based format and concentrates on the facts, not the theories. Today, and for the 7th time, I will take you back to the beginning, then right up to the present, as I cover recent updates on many of Unfound's cases. I'm Ed Dentzel, and this is Unfound. So we come to the end of another year, and what a year it has been. Certainly like no other, at least not in my lifetime. Yes, 2001 was horrible due to 9/11, but 2020, this was a creature all its own. Yet, despite everything that has happened over the last 366 days, remember this was a leap year. Businesses closing, social distancing, working from home, remote education, vacations canceled, deaths from COVID, mask shaming. Despite all of that, none of it stopped disappearances from happening. In fact, there are reasons to believe missing persons cases went up in number in 2020, which would not surprise me at all. The world keeps spinning. The sun keeps rising. And despite some of my philosopher friends reminding me that time is a social construct, time, whatever it is, keeps happening. And that's what Unfound will be doing in 2021. We will keep happening. I hope all of you will continue to join us as we feature missing persons cases and try to solve these mysteries. And now, a summary of Unfound. I'm going to give a shout out to Megan Good and her site charlieproject.org, even though I didn't need to use it for this particular episode. Unfound was born out of the idea that the public should know as much as it can about missing persons cases. I, as the host, go about getting you all the facts I can by interviewing those people who are closest to the case, usually family members. However, we've also had bloggers, reporters, and private investigators on the program, but only 2 law enforcement officers. Why? Because the police usually don't want to tell me anything. And unlike many programs that splice in the host's questions and comments after, Unfound plays every interview as it was recorded, minus the mistakes. The interviews are played in this manner because I believe you, the listeners, need to be reassured that nothing is taken out of context and that you are listening to a conversation like any 2 people might have. The first call I ever made representing myself as the host of Unfound was to Mary Lyle, mother of Suzanne Lyle. The call happened sometime in late July 2016. I was at my parents' place in Pennsylvania. I can remember standing in their bedroom with the door shut for privacy when I made the call. That's a true story. She surely had no idea who I was, and at that point I had no history of ever interviewing anybody. I can kind of rely on my extensive resume now. But at the time, I was just a guy on the other end of the phone line. I was very nervous. However, Mary couldn't have been friendlier. And I would say these days we talk about once every 2 months. And she has been very supportive of Unfound, I can't even begin to tell you, sending several future guests my way. I hope to meet her in person sometime soon. That conversation was followed by a call to Patrick Marker, the guest for the Joshua Guimond episode, then Tim Wright for the Ben Charles Padilla episode, and before I knew it, Unfound had gained some momentum. Probably the next big thing that happened for Unfound that pushed it forward was a listener kind of becoming my right-hand woman to find guests for the program. Emily, you've heard me mention her many times before, is responsible for finding probably half the guests you've heard on Unfound since May of 2017. Her passion and compassion make her excellent at what she does. She stays in contact with guests even after they've been on the program. Then, in December 2017, Unfound became linked with the Tribune-Review in Pittsburgh. It carried Unfound on its website throughout 2018, and I helped them cover older missing persons cases in Western Pennsylvania through monthly articles. Along the way, Unfound has also picked up Cherie Biggs, researcher and overseer of both the Unfound Live Show on YouTube and the Unfound Think Tank. Unfound also has Carrie Welburn and Heather Dobbins, administrators for the discussion group on Facebook. Heather is now also the manager of the Unfound store. Dr. Eric Grabowski, a personal confidant and independent researcher, and host of Unfound on the Ground. And Natasha, who is in charge of the website and the Unfound Podcast Channel on YouTube. There have been books and newsletters and t-shirts and poll questions, the website, theunfoundpodcast.com, the interviews with Dr. Grace Telesco, and, most importantly, the respect and concern all of you continue to show for Unfound's many, many guests. Like the first, second, third, fourth, fifth, and sixth update episodes from the summer of 2018, April of 2019, September of 2019, December of 2019, April of 2020, and August of 2020, respectively. I'll be doing all the talking today. I'm Ed Dentzel. I'm from Leechburg, Pennsylvania. I attended Grove City College, class of 93. I graduated with a degree in business that I've never had to use. I've had all sorts of odd jobs, including magic show stage manager, printer and fax machine technician, model, Department of Transportation flag person, and Star Trek actor. I lived in Las Vegas from 1998 to 2011, Madeira Beach, Florida from 2011 to 2019, and currently I live in Clearwater Beach, Florida. But Vegas is still my favorite city. Unfound news. I'm very sorry to announce the passing of Unfound guest Vicki Wilkerson. She was on the program during the summer of 2017 to talk about her daughter Jennifer, who disappeared from Lubbock, Texas on July 12th, 2004. I will be talking more about Vicki and her daughter's disappearance in the update section. Next, there has been an arrest regarding the disappearance of Unique Harris. The suspect's name is Isaac Moye, M-O-Y-E. His name did not come up in any discussion I had with Unique's mother, Valencia. Like Vicki Wilkerson's passing, I will be talking more about this in the update section. Finally, myself and my assistants want to wish all of you a Merry Christmas and a very happy New Year. We can all hope that 2021 is a better and less weirder year. Where you can find Unfound. Unfound supports accounts on Podomatic, iTunes, Stitcher, Instagram, Twitter, Spotify, Deezer, Facebook, and YouTube. Speaking of YouTube, on Wednesday nights at 9 p.m. Eastern, please join us on our podcast channel for the Unfound Live Show. All of you can talk with me, and I can answer your questions. Contribute to Unfound at patreon.com/Unfound Podcast. This week, I need to thank Tammy. You can also contribute at PayPal, paypal.me/Unfound Podcast. And the website, theunfoundpodcast.com. Okay, if you are listening to an update episode for the first time, this is how this goes. I have some notes in front of me. I do not type out the information into what you might call a script with sentences, with nouns and verbs and adjectives, etc. What I do is I go through all of Unfound's disappearances and I find out the ones that actually have had updates since the last update episode. And then I just jot down some notes regarding each of those disappearances that are going to be covered. So if you hear some ers and uhs and you knows and what we might call some pregnant pauses, that is the reason, because I do not have a script typed out in front of me. It would take hours and hours and hours and hours to do that. So this is the way I choose to do these update episodes, and that's the way I've done them since the first one, going way back to the summer of, was it 2017 or 2018? I get so confused. But here we go. The first update isn't really an update on a disappearance that we've covered, but since this news has been connected to a disappearance that we have covered on Unfound, I felt that I should talk about it. And that is the disappearance of Sam Sherman. The name probably is not familiar to most of you, but Jason Jolkowski and his disappearance surely is familiar. Well, for a long time, Jason's and Sam's disappearances have been connected. Why? Because they disappeared within a month of each other from Omaha, Nebraska, back in 2001. Jason disappeared first. Then approximately a month later, Sam disappeared. And even if you go back to the interview that I did with Jason's mother, Kelly, one of the first interviews I ever did for the program back in September of 2016, Sam's disappearance is mentioned, and you will hear Kelly say that she just has no idea. Just did not know anything at the time, and I don't think even to this day she knew anything about Sam's disappearance and whether it could be connected to Jason's or not. But they lived kind of close to each other, within a month of each other, around the same age. There are many similarities. Well, what happened within the last 6 weeks, and I am recording this in December 2020 for release on Christmas Day 2020, a listener of Unfound, and I'm not going to mention this listener's name. I'm sure he listens to many other true crime podcasts out there, but I don't know what those are, so I'm just going to call him an Unfound listener. He got very interested in trying to figure out who this Sam Sherman was or is, and more details about his disappearance. And I'm very happy to say that this listener was very, very successful. Just one of the best listener research projects that I know about. I mean, really, it's really, really up there. And this is what this listener discovered. The big problem has been, and I've even, when I have free time, which is, I don't have much, but I have at times kind of tried to look into Sam Sherman's disappearance, and his name is on NamUs, at least it was the last time I checked, and so you can look it up. And I've even had my assistant Cherie try to file a FOIA regarding Sam's disappearance, and I think we were not successful doing that. But the big question has always been, there's never been any records showing that a Sam Sherman ever lived, at least in this age range, lived in Nebraska at all, ever. So that's always been a stumper regarding Sam and trying to figure out what was he doing there and how did he disappear. The story has always been that he went for an interview, a job interview, and then disappeared after that. Well, this listener, in messing around with Sam's name, somehow figured out that Sherman is not Sam's last name. Sherman was actually Sam's middle name. And this goes to show something that I've said about NamUs for a long time now, that a lot of the information you're going to find down there is not 100% correct. So once this listener did that using a couple different databases online, and Sherman is fairly unique, I guess, middle name, not a somewhat common last name, but a unique middle name. Through that, this listener was able to determine Sam's actual last name. And when he did that, he was able to find out where Sam actually did live and everything. And believe it or not, Sam Sherman, as we know him, and I'm not going to, I know what Sam's real last name is, but I'm not going to release it. Sam Sherman is alive and well. In fact, he's a father. I think he is married, and he has a Facebook account that is current right now. This listener was able to contact Sam, and Sam got back to him. Sam had no idea that he was listed on NamUs. The way I understood it is that yes, at the time, back in 2001, he kind of sort of like did go missing for a few days, but he reappeared. And so it seems that the paperwork was never cleared up back in 2001 once he reappeared. But this happens. And given that this happened in Sam's case, I'm inclined to believe there are many other disappearances on NamUs where the people really aren't missing. They've popped up again and are alive, but they're still listed on there. So this really, really clears up something regarding this particular guy. I don't know if he even knew about Jason. I'm not sure if this listener ever talked to Sam about Jason Jolkowski. I don't know if Sam knew about Jason Jolkowski going missing. I don't know. But for any of you who have heard about Jason's disappearance and then heard also about Sam going missing a month later in the same general area, about the same age, we now, I think, can say pretty sure that these disappearances are not connected. And in fact, Jason is still missing. There is no resolution to his disappearance, whereas with Sam's, there is a resolution. And I'm happy to say he is alive and well, and I'm very happy to hear that. So that's it's not necessarily a Jason Jolkowski update, but I think it does dismantle one theory regarding maybe Sam and Jason being connected. They obviously are not. Next disappearance, Andrea Bowman. As I have written in my notes here, Dennis Bowman, it is presumed, he's not pled guilty. We know that he's taken a deal for the murder that he committed in Virginia back in 1980. But to my knowledge, once again, at the time that I recorded this in December 2020, I don't know if there's any deal on the table. I don't know what's going on necessarily. All I know is he's been charged with Andrea's murder, but there's been no resolution to that. So I can only take for granted that maybe we are going to have a trial in 2021 regarding Andrea's murder, and to see if Dennis can be proven to have committed it. And in my notes, what I was going to say is, I think we're going to be having a lot of trials in 2021 connected to disappearances we've covered on Unfound, and I will name them as I go through this episode. We, of course, at Unfound, and I think many of you believe that Dennis did kill Andrea. It certainly is telling that her remains were found on his property, and that is something that Andrea's mother, Kathy, believed for a long time. I think since day one, since she found out that her daughter Alexis was missing. But we'll see how this goes. That is something we'll keep an eye on. But the update is that there's been no trial. There's been no trial date. But I would anticipate something is going to happen in 2021. And given that Dennis pled guilty to the murder of the woman in Virginia, it very well may be that he just may plead guilty for Andrea's murder as well. We here at Unfound continue to believe that Dennis killed more than two people, more than the woman in Virginia, more than Andrea. I think we've convinced ourselves that he very well could be a serial killer, where he might have 4, 5, 6 murders he committed that he's just not been connected to them yet. I think he has all the signs of that, but we shall see. Right now, we're just concerned with Andrea slash Alexa's murder, and we hope that Dennis gets prosecuted to the fullest extent of the law. Next, Robin Abrams. Now, of course, if you are a weekly listener to Unfound, you know that just a few weeks ago, we covered Robin Abrams' disappearance again in much more depth than we did back in 2016 when her sister Jody was on the program. The second time around, the episode ended up being 4.5 hours. I replayed the original interview I did with Jody, but also I played an interview I did with a deputy who was in Will County at the time. And I'm not going to go through all of that again. I would urge you to just go back and listen to that episode. It's 4.5 hours long. That's just the way we do things here. But I think with Steve Knickrum being on that recent episode, we established that Will County was a very, very corrupt place to be in. The sheriff's office was a very, very corrupt place back in the 1980s, 1990s, not just to Robin, but to Steve and I think other people working there. And I'm hoping in 2021 that this is going to move things along. I know that Jody and Steve have told me since the episode came out that they have some plans to do some things, and I hope all of that happens. But I don't think that I can go on record with what that's going to be right now. I think that between the coverage in 2016 and 2020, I think it is very reasonable to believe, continue to believe even more than ever, that Robin's disappearance is connected to Will County and the Will County Sheriff's Office. Not just Tony Marquez, but a lot of the other men and women who were working in that office at the time. I think it's very reasonable to believe that. Can you prove that 30 years later? I don't know. But many of these people are still alive, and they have a lot to lose. And so I'm hoping that one of them grows a conscience and feels the pressure and can come forward and tell what they know, that information that can be proven regarding Robin's disappearance, because there's no doubt that her disappearance is connected. Not, once again, this was more than just a relationship gone bad. It was more than that. And I think that's why people had to make her disappear. So, once again, if you really want an update on Robin Abrams' disappearance, please go back to the episode, the 4.5 hour long episode that we did about 3 weeks ago. Next, Christopher Hyde. You know that earlier this year we discovered that his remains had been found in the Tampa area way back in 2004, and only it wasn't until this past summer that they were identified. It continues to be that we may never know what happened to Chris. It's very unfortunate to say. Given the lack of a lot of information regarding his disappearance, in regards to his father seemingly not caring too much about his son. Of course, Chris had some mental conditions which made it difficult for him to communicate and for him to live on his own. But he was found allegedly inside a trailer, I don't know what kind of trailer, in the Tampa area. And like I said, it took them 16 years to identify his remains, whereas he had disappeared from Orlando. So I don't know if it was reasonable to expect that he would be in the Tampa area or not. There was a belief that he was seen in Bradenton, Florida at some point, which of course is no near Orlando, kind of near Tampa, but certainly not near Orlando. But I think we just have to be prepared for that we may never know how he died. But his remains have been found, they've been identified, and his sister Lila and the rest of his family have finally gotten to take Chris home. But the update is we just may never know what happened to him. He may well have been murdered, but I just don't know how that's going to be proven after 16 years. Many of you surely suspected that this next one was coming, But an update with Eric Franks. I have to tell you, this is probably one of the most startling developments that we've had on Unfound since Unfound got started in over 4 years. I would certainly say that Esther Westenbarger being found in her car in that retention pond, certainly surprising. I don't know how many people predicted that. Chris Turner's remains being found in Las Vegas. Certainly, I think at least a bit surprising. But with Eric's, not just that the car was found, but how it was found, and that it wasn't parted out, that it wasn't trashed or anything else. And in fact, you could say that it was in plain sight kind of the whole time. It all adds together to be one of the more easily in the top 5 startling developments that has happened on Unfound. If you don't know what I'm talking about, what occurred was this. Back in September, Eric's car was found. And the way it was found is that there has been some private person who occasionally has been going on Carfax and putting in the VIN for Eric's car. Just in the hopes, remote hopes, that somehow the car's VIN would show up, the vehicle identification number. And who would have thunk it, but in September of 2020, that's exactly what happened. That this person put this VIN in, and it turned out that very recently, Eric's car had gotten an oil change in the state of Ohio. Well, that's interesting because he disappeared from Michigan. So this started a sequence of events. Of course, Eric's family was alerted to this. This person discovered this, went to law enforcement, and eventually Eric's family, his mother Joanne, in particular, were alerted to this. And using records from the place that did the oil change, they were able to track down who had the car. And it was this guy in Ohio, and he had a story. What he does is he kind of is a good Samaritan, guy who kind of a Robin Hood, a guy who's giving back. And what he does is he finds cheap cars that are up for auction or whatever and buys them and then gives them to poor people who need transportation. He fixes them up, makes sure they're in running condition, and gives them to poor people. Fantastic work. It's just so good. And this guy had gotten this Eric's car. He didn't, of course, know it was Eric's car at an auction in Michigan. Well, the auction was being held because this car was found on this old man. His name is Gerald Rutledge. He lives in Saginaw, Michigan. This car was found in his garage after Gerald disappeared earlier this year. I forgot, I didn't write it down in my notes. I'm thinking it was April or May of 2020. So as we know, these estates go up for auction if the person doesn't have a will, or whatever the will or paperwork says, however this person plans for his or her death. Well, Jared Rutledge was not a poor man. Even though he lived in a very modest house in Saginaw, it was worth $2 million. We had this car that was in his garage, and there wasn't a title for it. Of course, the people who found it were taking care of this, just thought it was his, and they put it up for auction. This guy in Ohio bought it. I don't even know for how much. How much could it have been? Not much. And that's how this all got started. He, of course, was fixing it up, got the oil changed, and what do you know? There you go. That's how it ended up on this Carfax report, that this person, this independent private person, found it once it had gone through the internets. And what's interesting about this, you should know that not all oil change places, of course, are connected to Carfax, so got lucky. Well, how did Gerald Rutledge get that car? Well, it turns out that Kendra, the mother of Eric's child, you'll remember that there's always been this idea that Kendra and her husband, John, had something to do with Eric's disappearance. Well, the story goes, now that they're looking at all of this, into all of this that right after Eric disappeared, Kendra had this job taking care of old people, and Gerald Rutledge was one of them. Now, she lost that job eventually because some people who cared about Gerald, I don't know if he has any kids or friends, they suspected that he was being taken advantage of by Kendra and possibly John. So Kendra, I guess, was kicked out of that. But while she was taking care of Gerald, in-home nurse, I don't know what you'd call it, she gave him this car. She gave him Eric's car as a gift, quote-unquote gift. Remember, it's not a gift if it's somebody else's. You're giving somebody else's possession. It surely was somebody else's possession. But that's how that happened. Eric disappears, and all of a sudden, Kendra is giving Eric's vehicle to Gerald Rutledge, and she never told anybody about it. And it seems the car was never driven, and it sat in his garage for all those 9 years. Even after Kendra was dismissed from taking care of Mr. Rutledge anymore. Now, I mean, startling. Just everything just had to perfectly come together for this to happen. You just don't know how lucky this is. Now, given that, and I will tell you, looking back at my interview with Joanne, nothing ever came up about Kendra taking care of Gerald Rutledge. I had never heard his name until this all happened here in 2020. But going back and doing a Google Street View, and in fact, I posted those pictures on the group, in the discussion group on Facebook and on the page on Facebook. If you go back, like I said, Gerald Rutledge lives in a very modest house. Lived in a very modest house in Saginaw. It's so modest that the garage wasn't even attached to the house. You would have to go outside, and there was a garage sitting, what you would say, I guess, in the backyard. And it was a two-car garage. But it was not a normal two-car garage. It had one of those wide doors that, just one huge door that opens. It was two individual garage doors. And if you go back and look at you can see if you Google Street View, go up to Gerald's house and look in the back, you can see the garage. I think it was in 2009, if you were to do that picture, one door has windows in it, the other door does not. So you could look into the garage through one door, you couldn't look into the garage through the other garage door. You move up to 2013, so before, one door has windows, the other door does not. You go up to 2013 to after Eric disappeared. He disappeared in 2011. That door with the windows has been replaced by a door without windows. And as I've stated since I discovered this sometime, I guess, early October of 2020, it's just those little things. And I've told myself since then, more than once, I've really gone over this. Had Gerald Rutledge, had we known at the time that Kendra was taking care of Gerald Rutledge, and that's all we knew, I'm thinking at some point I would have gone and looked at his house. I don't know what I would be looking for. We all do that. But just do a Google Street View, and I know that I would have seen, knowing that Eric's car was missing, seeing that garage back there, I'm sure that something would have started to go through my head, and I surely would have happened upon the windows, the door with the windows in 2009, a door without windows in 2013. I surely would have noticed that. But this is why I continue to think that in many of these disappearances, there are clues out there like this. Had we known about Gerald Rutledge, I'm sure somebody, maybe not even myself, would have gone and done a Google Street View of his house and noticed that, because you can do different years on Google Street View. If you have Google Earth Pro, that is, not on the regular Google.com, but if you have Google Earth Pro, you can do that, and I think sometimes you can do that on regular Google.com. In any case, somebody surely would have done it. if it wasn't me and somebody would have noticed that and said, well, Eric's car is missing. Then we have this door that has windows, and then it doesn't after Eric disappears. Pretty sure. Now, what has happened since then? This all transpired late September, early October of 2020. I don't know. I'm taking for granted that police have gone and talked to John. He lives here in Florida. I've not read anything about that. Joanne hasn't told me anything about that, but you'd have to think that that has gone on. But it's just one of these things you just never know. Just like Esther Westerbarger's car being found by those kids that went out on that little retention pond to fish. You never know when something's going to happen. The big problem is that in each of these situations, it was pure luck. And as I've said, if we're going to rely on luck to solve these missing persons cases, that's going to be a little difficult. Now, we should know Eric has still not been found. They've taken samples from the basement of the house, from the garage floor of the house. Nothing. To my knowledge, nothing was found. And I think that the new homeowner, whoever's in there, has been, of course, they have to go along with it at that point, but I think that they've been very happy to let police have access to the home. I've heard something about maybe there was a new incinerator in this house or something, and that's how rumors get started. But so far, I've not heard anything that has pointed them in a direction to find out where Eric is. I think now that we know that Kendra gave Gerald Rutledge Eric's car, I think we can now say that Eric is gone. And I think it makes a lot of sense that Kendra and John did something to him. Will we ever know the reason? I don't know. We have to remember Kendra's deceased. I know there's even rumors regarding that. But she's gone. So only John is left. So, but still, this is better than nothing. I'll take it. It's one little more. It's a huge, not a little piece. It's a huge piece of this puzzle. You never could have expected that Eric's car, being missing all these years, would be found, and then it was found, and it was in one piece, in running condition, and sitting in somebody else's. It was sitting in Gerald Rutledge's garage for a while, and then it was sitting in this guy in Ohio's house, in his garage, for a while as well. Just, you never know what can happen here. But that's the update on Eric Franks. Just completely startling. I'm happy it happened, and just don't know where we're gonna go from here, though. Tough to say. Next, once again, I'm not sure technically this is an update, but I'm hoping that you have been watching my interviews that I've done with Dr. Grace Telesco. We did a new series that she's doing on her own. I was on her program in September, October, November on the Thursdays that she has her show. She does other things on those other Thursdays, but I've been on 3 Thursdays, September, October, November, and we hope to continue that in 2021. But the Marco Island 3 was a disappearance that the one we covered in October of 2020. And Dr. Telesco was the one that pointed out. She is a scuba diver, so that caught her attention, and so she wanted to talk about it. I think in the end, the people who watched that, many people who are finding out about the disappearances of these 3 young men from Canada for the first time, I think they agree with all of us, who, I told you I'm not using a script to do this. I think they agree with all of us that the biggest stumper regarding all this is really believing that Jeff Wandich swam from where the boat was found under the water to that buoy or communications tower in the dark. Really, really hard to imagine. I don't necessarily say it's impossible, like trying to, jump over the Grand Canyon, like trying to long jump over the Grand Canyon. That would be impossible, but it stretches the imagination. I know I use that saying a lot when I write for the blog. I say it in interviews, but I try to get inside and, well, can I imagine that? Can I really get creative and see that actually happening? And it really pushes my imagination to believe that somebody could do that. even if it was some Olympic swimmer or a triathlete. But to be able to do that in dark and just happen to get it right, the current and everything, and just this is a very, very small window of opportunity, because even the current may be pushing that way toward the communication tower, but you have to line yourself right up with it. I mean, how big is that communication tower? And if you miss it, it's not like you're going to be able to swim back against the current once you pass it. Once you pass it, it's gone. So we got to talk about that, and I think we did a good job there. So much information. It's hard to put it all into an hour discussion, but I think we did the best we could. And you should know since then that there have been another program that has done coverage of the Marco Island 3, and their David Medot's father once again did an interview with another program. I'm thinking sometime in November, so like a month ago. It was like 3 different sections. I've not had a chance to listen to it, but I know that he has sent me information regarding that he did do that. So that happened after we talked about his son and the other 2 young men's disappearances when I talked to Dr. Grace Kolesko. If you'd like to check that out, if you have not watched that yet, you can go to the Unfound Podcast Channel and scroll down there to find my discussion with Dr. Grace Kolesko about the Marco Island 3. And, of course, if you've not listened to the original episode, you have to go back to March of 2017. It's a 2-parter. Be aware of that. So that's the update for the Marco Island 3. Next, I want to talk a little bit about the disappearance of Klishindra Hall, a young woman who disappeared from Arkansas in 1994. Now, the reason I am talking about it is just recently a local TV station in Arkansas did a segment with multiple people regarding Klishindra's disappearance. Of course, it's 26 years old. And although I did not catch it live, I did see people who were commenting on it once it played. And once I did find out this was going on, or it had gone on, I made a comment. I had watched it, the coverage, and then I made a comment on Facebook, on this page of the local TV station's page. I said that, in my opinion, I did not say that, hey, I'm the host of Unfound. I didn't do anything like that. I just, regular person, just like the rest of you. I just went on there and said, I think the number one suspect in her disappearance should continue to be Omar Amos. And it was a little surprising to me how many responses I got to it saying, we don't even know who that is. Now, one of the issues regarding nobody knowing who it is that even in Unfound's original coverage from 2017, in me talking to Klishindra's mother, Laurel, Omar's name never came up. Why? I didn't know that the older son existed. I'm not even sure that Laurel knew back in 2017 that Dr. Amos had an older son. We did talk about his younger son, who was like 4 years old at the time. Of course, he could not be considered a suspect in Klishindra's disappearance. Because if you remember, Klishindra was working. She worked for Dr. Amos at his house. He had an office there. And there's allegations that Dr. Amos was doing some things that were illegal. I'm not saying he was killing anybody or hurting anybody, but I think they was ripping off Medicare or Medicaid, something like that, fudging the books to get more money. That's what it sounds like to me. I'm not an expert in that area. But Klishindra was working for him at his house, and he was there. His wife was there, and his 4-year-old son was there. And I have to admit, I just took for granted that that's the only family he had. Yeah, we tend to do things a little differently these days in Unfound. But after the fact, a listener who heard the episode contacted me and let me know, he has this older son named Omar with 2 R's, Omarr. And at the time, Omar would have been very close to Klishindra's age. And it turns out that a couple years after Klishindra disappeared in 1994, a few years later, 96, 97, Omar did get in trouble for assault on a woman, and he continued to have a criminal record throughout his life. Now, the bad news is he's dead now. In fact, he died this year. And he was, I think, 46 years old. I do not know how he died. I tried to find that out just using general databases, trying to find any news. Could not find that out. I don't know if he had cancer. I don't know if he committed suicide. I don't know if he was murdered. I don't know. But I think this, unfortunately, I think this was a glaring omission from the original interview I did with Laurel, and I've tried to make up for it in the Unfound book series in which I wrote about Klishindra's disappearance, and anytime her name comes up, I always try to bring that up. I'm not so sure how Laurel feels about this older son who would have been around Klishindra's age. I don't know how she feels about suspecting him as being the main suspect. But I have to certainly lean that way. You see a young man around the same age who then has charges that are crimes against women. It's not hard to put that all together. Now, the tough part is that, from my understanding, is that Omar did not live with his father at the time. Omar was living with his mother. This is a son from Dr. Amos's, I guess, previous marriage. And he was living, and I looked up the address. It's not close to where Dr. Amos lived at the time from where Klishindra disappeared. Remember, it's a very short walk from where Dr. Amos lived to where Klishindra's family home was, like a half-mile walk, or maybe a little longer than that. And the allegation is she left and somewhere she disappeared in between. I'm inclined to think that at some point in the past, Omar had been over to his father's and encountered Klishindra. And knew when she was going to be working there, maybe even asking his father, hey, I saw that cute girl there working for you. When she's going to be there again? When is she going to be there again? I'd like to run into her. And that's all it would take. That's all it would take. And this Omar knew when she was going to be leaving. He was waiting outside, maybe instead offered her, give her a ride home, and something happened. This is how disappearances happen. I'm not making this. We all know that disappearances is a very common situation. Very common. I'm not saying there's any proof to support that. I don't know if anybody saw Omar in the area at the time, but it occurs to me, being that local people in Arkansas who know about Klishindra's disappearance don't even know about Omar, then people maybe on that street have never even been asked about Omar. Now, granted, it's been 26 years later, so it's going to be tough. But they've never maybe even been asked about it. And as I've learned, you don't know what people know until you ask. So it's hard to suspect somebody when people don't even know that person exists. It's a little difficult. So Omar Amos continues to be my number one suspect, and then I can certainly understand how Dr. Amos in particular might continue to cover up for his son, even though I've heard that he and his son did not have that close a relationship. Still, it's still father and son. Just can never tell what could go on there. But Omar Amos, it seems local people in Arkansas who knew about the disappearance never heard of him, and I was happy to alert them to his existence. Tough part, though, he's deceased. Next update, I've already mentioned his name in this episode, but Chris Turner, his remains were found, or identified, I should say, in 2020. But you should know, once again, we've already talked about this on a previous update episode, that they were found, but then not identified. They were found in 2017. Remember, he went missing in August of 2016. They were found in April of 2017. Down near the area of Sunrise Mountain, if you want to look that up on a map. It's kind of at the end of Charleston Boulevard on East Charleston. Having lived there, I know. Down in that area, you can look up Sunrise Mountain. Down in that area in the desert. Not sure if they were buried or just on the surface. Not sure how much of his remains were found, but They were put into an unmarked grave in Las Vegas in 2017, and then the DNA match finally happened this year. That Chris's mother, Dawn, certainly suspects that his girlfriend at the time is responsible. Her and other people are responsible for his disappearance. I have not heard any facts to support or reject that theory. I think it seems like one that is still very viable. The tough part is that if somebody did kill Chris, would they have just dumped him in an area where somebody might just happen upon his remains? That's, it's not like he was dumped in a forest somewhere or buried. This was right on the outskirts of town. And my understanding is that, once again, these remains were found by accident. So I just don't know. And these remains were not near where Chris was living at the time. I think back the time when this happened, I think I looked it up. I think it was like 8 miles away. I don't want to be totally negative. I think there's a much better chance of something, if there was foul play, for that to be proven in this disappearance, in contrast to what I previously said about Christopher Hyde's disappearance, but I just don't know. I just don't know. I think that we have to be open to the idea that we may never know, and that's not to be negative. I don't want to feel like that. I don't want to think like that. But when remains have been collected and they've been put in a grave and then they're being exhumed again, I understand that eventually Chris is going to get moved back to where his family is in Reno. That's all you have is that. Those are the only facts you have regarding Chris's death. So from that, I think it's going to be a little difficult to prove that a murder was committed unless, really something unique happens. But I'll hold out hope. I think it makes a lot of sense that something happened, especially since the way his girlfriend and her family acted after Chris disappeared, claiming that they saw him, which I think now we now know are lies. But we have to brace ourselves for the fact that we may just never know, and that sucks. But I know Dawn will keep working at it, and at least the remains were found. At least this isn't something where the Las Vegas police could say, well, hey, he could still be out there alive, which is, of course, what they did for a long time. We know that, if you remember going back, that it was through the girlfriend's and her mother's testimony and statement that got Chris's disappearance case closed. And then it took Dawn like 2 years to get it reopened and try, convincing them, hey, these people are lying. And that's great that she did that. What's also distressing is that Chris, it took them over 3 years to identify his remains. That's law enforcement agencies and government agencies. You got to do better than that. Next, Dominic, Hawley, Grisham. And I'm just going to tell you right now, there's only so much I can say. There has been, if you follow Moselle, his mother, and if you follow Dominic's page on Facebook, you know that within the last few months stuff has been going on. I don't know if it's real. I don't know if it's contrived. We know how many trolls there are out there. We know how people will just put rumors out there for no reason. Moreover, they'll hear somebody say something and they'll spread it as if it's truth, and the person doesn't bother to check any of it. We know how that happens on the internet. It happens in all. You pick a topic, and it happens. Sports, politics, movies, music, geology, astronomy. You pick it, it's happening. Rumors, conjecture. But I want you to know that I have talked to Dominic's mother, Moselle, about this. Like I said, there's only so much I can say. I think right at this point, just don't know what to make of it. I think it's a little distressing because the people being mentioned, once again, this is you could see this going on for yourselves. Once again, if you're friends with Moselle on Facebook or you're part of the page, these are people who I think are very close to Moselle, who are saying this, and rumors being created that these people could have been involved in Dominic's disappearance. And this has just been going on within the last couple months. Maybe this has been going on for a while. Maybe I just haven't noticed it, but it certainly did catch my eye a couple months ago. The reason that, though, this might be true is because that maybe somebody very, very close to Dominic kind of set his disappearance in motion. I'm not saying they were necessarily responsible, but they might have unwittingly set it in motion, is because if you go back to the facts of Dominic's disappearance, he had a hockey game earlier that day. His mother and others were preparing this birthday party for him. His birthday had been a couple days before that, and they finally had time. They were going to throw this party, going to be a big get-together, lots of people, lots of food, birthday cake, great time. And Moselle goes out to shop, and Dominic's at home with two of his family members. Was it a younger brother and an uncle? Something like that. And he gets a phone call, and he's out the door. And to this day, we don't know who Dominic was talking to, but obviously it was somebody who had his phone number. And my theory has been, since I covered the disappearance, that I can't rule out that maybe his ex-girlfriend, I'm not saying she did it, but she might have, to use the word again, unwittingly put something in motion which got out of her control. Because the day before, Dominic and she had broken up, and he had written some nasty things about her at the time. I think it was on MySpace, not Facebook. So we have to kind of put that all together. Is it a coincidence that he does this and then the next day he disappears? And on top of that, who would have the power or the cachet or the influence in Dominic's life that he's at home, he gets this phone call, and immediately he's out the door? That to me sounds like it's either a very good friend calling him or a woman in his life calling him. That's what it sounds like to me. So given all of that, then we hear recently some people that were close to Moselle and Dominic putting things out there, rumors going around that these people, that's what kind of makes them a little more true than we might usually expect. So just don't know, but that continues to be my theory. You know, I don't do theories on the program, although I have written about theories in the Unfound books. But that just continues to be my theory, and maybe these recent back and forths, you might call them, lend some credence to that rumor or theory that I've had for a while now. Next, Zoe Campos. This is once again one of those disappearances. Of course, we now know her remains were found, and we know that Carlos Rodriguez has been charged with her murder. And there is going to be a trial happening sometime in 2021. This is another one of those disappearances where we're talking about an upcoming trial. And I'm going to do this at least a few more times before this episode is over. You should know that our mother, Melinda, has actually invited me to Texas for when the trial happens. I did talk to her several months ago, maybe this past summer, and she did state that. And if that happens, I will certainly consider it. It'll depend on what I have going on in my life. But to even be asked for her to bring it up certainly humbles me. It certainly shows that she has, I guess, a lot of respect for me, and I'm happy to have earned that. So that's another trial that we will be expecting in 2021. I get the idea. You should know, in talking to Melinda, and I think I can say this, that the belief is that Carlos is going to use some sort of accident defense, or that yes, they did drugs and something happened and he started attacking her and he had to defend himself. It sounds to me like that's what he's going to try to do. But nothing can discount the idea that, well, Carlos, you're the one who buried her in your backyard, right? Well, if that happened and it was self-defense, why don't you just call 911? Why do you have to bury her and then not admit that she was there when the police came around the first time? So we'll see how that goes. I'm hoping a jury doesn't fall for that. I hope he is prosecuted to the fullest extent of the law, and I hope he serves as much time. And I know Texas has a death penalty too, so I think I could be open to that as well. But that's another trial we will be expecting in 2021, and you can certainly expect, whether I go to the trial or not, that we will be talking about it. Probably most likely on the live show that happens on Wednesday nights on YouTube. Next, and probably by this time, and for many of you who have listened to the update episodes before, I start with the oldest disappearances and then slowly work my way up to the newest disappearances. So essentially starting in September 2016 and going October, November, December, then January 2017, the whole way up to the present. That's how I do this. That's why I say go but right from the beginning right up to the present until the most recent disappearance, which is the last one we featured on Unfound before this update episode, was Bonnie Santiago. So if you know that I'm going in that order, you know that we are getting very close to this disappearance. One that, despite having covered a couple hundred disappearances, not a couple hundred, 100 or more disappearances since this particular one, you know that this one still stands out. And I have to admit, when we covered it on Unfound, I never could have predicted that. But that's Tom Brown's. Now, the big issue is, has there been any updates? This is an update episode. I'm not here to go through all the permutations of what's happened over the last over 4 years since he disappeared. That's not the purpose of this episode for any disappearance that Unfound has covered. This is an update episode. This is for anything that has happened since the last update episode, which was done at the end of August of 2020. I do these update episodes every 4 months. So the next one you can expect will be at the end of April 2021. But I have to tell you, my perception is there aren't any updates. And maybe that's an update in and of itself. And in fact, I will go even further to say that have there been any updates, really notable updates in the past year? I know that I've mentioned some things in the previous updates, I think, in 2020, but my perception is this disappearance, the investigation, etc., isn't any further ahead than it was a year ago. Now, a year ago, there were certainly things going on. Nathan Lewis resigned or got fired. There was this recording of this meeting that shouldn't have been recorded. We now know that Nathan Lewis did that. I've gotten to speak to Pine Gregory twice. I think he and I continue to have a cordial relationship. I know that my assistant Cherie continues to keep in contact with him, and I do appreciate the time that Pine has given to talk to me, but frankly, he will not do an on-the-record interview. He has his reasons. I'm sure you have your suspicions. I'm just telling you that I've tried. It just hasn't happened yet. But a lot of going back and forth. I know a lot of criticism directed at me. A lot of me directing criticism at other people. And the gnashing of teeth. The airing of Tom's private life, you know what I'm talking about. I'm not going to dignify that by bringing it up here. Lots of people staking out positions, but the fact is, I know what people were saying. From here in Clearwater Beach, Florida, it doesn't seem like there are any updates. I keep hearing things about grand juries are going to happen, and we're going to take this to the grand jury. And a certain segment believing that Penny and her family have covered up things regarding Tom's disappearance. People believing that Tom was murdered. People believing this, people believing that. And, of course, I have my suspicions, too. But I have them because I'm human. That's how our minds work. But I just don't think we're any further ahead than we were a year ago. I'll be as interested as anybody. Should a grand jury be convened? If it hasn't been, you hear all these rumors coming out of there. I don't live there. But we also have to realize that just because a grand jury has been convened doesn't mean anything. In fact, I think a good example of that was just recently with when we revisited Robin Abrams' disappearance. There was a grand jury that was done back in 2014 for hers. And I got to tell you, there is surely more information that could lead you to believe that Robin was murdered. Certainly more information for her than there is for Tom Brown. I'm not saying he wasn't. If we're going to compare information that could lead to a murder suspicion, there's certainly more in Robin's case than Tom's case. And guess what? Nobody in all those people, Tony Marquez, etc., have never been charged with anything regarding Robin's disappearance. And I think it's much more obvious that they did something to Robin than anybody that's ever been mentioned in Tom's disappearance and death. And we have to remember, we don't have any cause of death there. I'm not saying somebody didn't murder him. I'm just saying it's just not as obvious as in Robin's. And still, nobody's been charged with her. So I don't know how we could expect that to be different in Tom's. Because I just don't see, I've not heard, I've not seen, I've not read any information that leads me to believe anybody's ever going to be charged with anything. Whereas, on the other hand, once again, to make a comparison with Robin's, I think we all believe she was murdered. I think the tough part, of course, with that is her remains haven't been found. So I think we just have to all keep this in perspective. And in fact, if there's one thing that's certainly got out of hand, it's been the lack of perspective that people seem to have on Tom's case. I think because everybody has become an expert on Tom's disappearance, but they don't look at other disappearances to try to compare and contrast. I think if more people were to do that and take 100 other random disappearances, even ones where remains have been found but nobody's been charged with anything, you start to realize that a lot of these cases, nobody ever gets prosecuted with anything, even though there are a lot of theories out there that the person was murdered, and there might be good reason to believe that. And still, no charges are ever made. So I think we just have to keep this in mind. But from an investigation standpoint, I don't think any of this has moved ahead in the last year, despite people saying otherwise. Next, Stephen Kocher. This is another one where I couldn't have suspected within the last month or 6 weeks that I would get all this information. I have to admit, I certainly wasn't looking for it, but sometimes these things just come your way when you least expect it. And I was very fortunate. I cannot name this person. I still cannot, hit the microphone there. Still cannot name this person, and I never will name this person unless that person wants to identify himself. But I had somebody who I've known for a while send me all of the information that you've seen that has been posted on Facebook, and in particular on the website, the Unfound Podcast.com. It's really nice to have the website because my opinion is it's a lot easier to get people information like PDF files on there than it is on Facebook or somewhere else. So if you don't know what I'm talking about regarding all this information that I received within the last month regarding Stephen's disappearance, I urge you to go to the unfoundpodcast.com and find those downloads for yourself. Some of them are quite long and quite large, so be prepared for that. So if you're going to be downloading them to your phone, it may take up some memory. But I want once again thank the person who sent me all of this information. I really want to thank that person for trusting me with it and trusting that I would keep this person's identity a secret. But this information is all genuine, and I think if you haven't looked at it yet, as soon as you see this information, you will know that it's 100% real. Some of the highlights, I could never go through everything. I mean, even I think the Henderson Police Department report itself is like 160 some pages. Here are some of the highlights, the way I see it. And I've already talked about this during the live show. So if you'd like a more complete analysis, please go to that live show probably from about 3 weeks ago. I'm sure it's tagged. I'm sure Natasha's put a tag on it, so you can find it. Some of the highlights. Somebody in the private security in the Anthem area of Henderson, where Stephen's car was eventually found, stated in January of 2010, so roughly a month after Stephen disappeared, that he could have sworn that Stephen's car was parked in that exact same spot earlier that month of December 2009. Could swear that he saw Stephen's car there some days, which means you could say a theory would be that Stephen had been to that neighborhood before, was there, parked there for a while, then left, and then, of course, came back the day that he disappeared. This speaks to me because I've thrown it out there that there is at least a little of a reason to believe that maybe Stephen had been to that neighborhood before. Why? Because no directions were ever found in his car. No, he didn't have GPS. He had like a flip phone. And there's nothing that said, why did he end up on that street? Well, even if somebody gives him a 123 Elm Street in Henderson, well, without looking at a map, or how are you going to know how to get there? And he didn't have a map in his car. So what makes sense to me is the reason he knew where to go and parked that car where he did is because he had been there before. I'm not saying he was there the week before, but at some point it was close enough that he remembered how to get there, and that's why he didn't need directions, because he had been there before. He needed the directions the first time, but not the time in which he disappeared. So when I read this in this report that this private security guard said, yeah, I think I saw his car here before, I was like, oh, well, maybe I am right about that. Maybe. Or the security guard is just hallucinating. I don't know. Some of the other things. A neighbor on Evening Light Street, when questioned by police once this all gets started, stated that she saw on the very day that Stephen was in the neighborhood, of course, parked his car and walked past those two cameras, the very same day there was a family in that neighborhood that was moving out. And their last name are the DiMaggios, and I can say their name. These records are now public. And the neighbor's opinion, remember this is an opinion, is that these people moved out quite quickly. It's like the U-Haul came in, and within a matter of hours they were out of there and never came back. Now, once again, this is a neighbor's opinion. It very well may be that DiMaggios had been moving for days and days and days, and this neighbor never noticed. Very possible. But this is the way the neighbor explained it to police in this report. Now, you should know that the police tried to reach the DiMaggios, and unlike all the other neighbors who were already there when the police were going down the street and talked or got back to the police very quickly, the DiMaggios, it seems, were the only ones that were fairly difficult to find. The police would put a business card on the front door. They'd wait a couple days. They'd go back. The business card was gone, meaning somebody had been there and collected the business card and still never bothered to call the police. Now, you should know, this is not the first time I've personally heard about the DiMaggios. I happened upon their name years ago because, frankly, well before I ever started Unfound, I had been looking up people on the Evening Lights Drive, and what I discovered is that the DiMaggios did live on Evening Lights Drive, but then the next address they lived at, probably maybe where they were moving to that day that Stephen disappeared, was down more into Henderson, maybe to explain it to all of you, closer to down near where Sunset Station is, and that's the approximate area where Stephen's phone last pinged. Now, that could be a total coincidence, but it certainly caught my eye. Now, you should know that The DiMaggios have a son who is a bit older than Stephen is. I forget I did the calculations on how much older and what he would have been at the time, but let's just say that this son is like 10 years older than Stephen is, something like that. And the police had a chance to talk to this guy. I think he's in his 40s now. I have to admit, in the report that I read, it seemed like this guy has some things going on mentally. It was unclear. The guy does have a criminal record, although nothing violent. But the month before Stephen disappeared, this guy had gotten caught driving without insurance in Las Vegas, something like that. But when asked what his job was, he came up he was an inventor, and he was trying to invent something that would protect people who were waiting for buses. You hear about these stories about cars going out of control and hitting people waiting for a bus. He says he was trying to invent something to protect these people. Now, you should know this guy has, maybe hearing that, you aren't surprised that this guy has a variety of drug charges. So, but I also discovered that he has since moved to, I think, North Dakota since Stephen disappeared. Of course, the DiMaggio said they have no idea who Stephen is. Their son says he has no idea who Stephen is. But the fact is, Stephen on that camera was walking in the direction of their house on that day that the neighbor said they were moving. Just putting that out there. However, what we can't leave out of any Stephen Kocher discussion is his landlord. And we can now publicize his name. I think some of you know it already, but it is in those documents. His name is Brett Bishop. And I have to admit that got a couple things out of order regarding him and everything that relates to Stephen's disappearance. In the paperwork that I received, it goes through how Brett eventually ended up in jail. This actually all started before Stephen disappeared, not after. In fact, well before. What had happened was that just like the nosy neighbor, I guess, on Evening Light Street, there was a nosy neighbor in Brett's neighborhood in St. George, Utah, who noticed that Brett had this Porsche SUV in his garage that seemingly he never drove. And when the garage door was open, it might have an Arizona license plate on it, or it might not have a license plate on it at all. And the neighbor wondered what the heck's going on. The neighbor goes to the police. And I guess that was enough, at least to read the report, that they started sniffing around. The police started sniffing around, and given that there was this Arizona license plate, the police started looking around. Could there be any SUVs from Arizona that fit this description that have been stolen? And it turned out they did find one, and so because of that, they got a warrant. They went in when Brett wasn't there. One thing led to another, and they were able to determine that Brett, the SUV in his garage, was stolen. Of course, eventually he came up with some story about how somebody just gave it to him. You know how that goes. But in the process of doing this, they found that Brett he was working for some company that delivered medication to people, and it turns out that Brett was ripping people off and collecting some of this for himself. And I'm presuming selling them these pills for whatever they were for cash, either in person or wherever. And all of this put together is the reason that he eventually got thrown in jail. And in fact, I think as of December 2020, I think he's still in jail. But I think what's important here is this started anyway before Stephen disappeared. To my understanding, Brett Bishop was still a free man at the time of Stephen's disappearance. And it has been theorized, both by myself and others, that maybe Stephen went missing because of something that he knew about what Brett was doing. I think that's still a viable theory. Could it be that he was driving around delivering these illegal pills to people? Because we know that Stephen was driving all over the place. Or was it because, or maybe we could go in this direction, that being that Brett knew he was being asked about this stolen SUV and knew that he was going to get in trouble for it, maybe he suspected that Stephen was the one who ratted him out. Just a theory. We don't like to do too many theories here, but just trying to put this in a nice little picture for you. There's a problem, though. There's no connection, at least to my understanding. There's no connection between Brett Bishop and the DiMaggios in Las Vegas. None that I've ever heard. I'm sure the police have looked into that. So I can certainly believe that Brett Bishop might have set Stephen up somehow. That happens. We've talked about luring, Luring, on the program. Very common way that people end up going missing. But I think that if you're going to suspect Brett, then you can't suspect either the DiMaggios or their son. And likewise, if you suspect that the DiMaggios or their son had something to do with Stephen's disappearance, then you can't suspect Brett Bishop, because after all these years, it doesn't seem like there's been a connection, at least made publicly, to connect the two. And I can tell you, in the paperwork that I saw regarding all of the DiMaggio stuff from Henderson Police Department, Brett Bishop isn't mentioned once. Likewise, in the paperwork I saw regarding the investigation of Brett Bishop up in Utah regarding the Porsche and everything else, nobody in the DiMaggio family is mentioned once. So it's just difficult. It's difficult to try to put that all together into something that can be understood. I think what I'm saying is that outside of there being a connection between Brett Bishop and the DiMaggios, and they were all in this together and to do something to Stephen, I think at some point we're going to have to pick one. And even then, maybe both picks would be wrong. Maybe it's something totally different. But it doesn't seem to me, at least in December 2020, there's any viable connection between the DiMaggios and Brett Bishop. There's no signs anywhere that they knew each other. Even though I have to admit, in both police reports, they sound like both groups or people, all these people sound like very shady people. That doesn't mean they knew each other. So, and we also have to remember what that private security guard said, that he thinks that Stephen's car was in that neighborhood before. Just don't know. But that's the highlights, I think, of the reports. I would urge you to go and read the PDF files. Go to theunfoundpodcast.com, find those files to download, those PDF files to download, and to read them for yourself. Maybe something else that kind of I missed will get your attention. You should also note, in the Henderson Police Department, they also do talk about the search that was done in April of 2010. I was there. That was when I still lived in Las Vegas, and I took part in that search. And the way it is described in the paperwork is exactly how it happened. Next, Alyssa Turney. This is something that I just happened upon by accident within the last 48 hours. I didn't realize this. Maybe some of you did, and I know that you've followed Alyssa's disappearance, everything that's gone on with her disappearance, very closely. I try to. That's why I do these update episodes, but I know that you follow it almost on a daily basis. But the trial, from what I saw on Twitter, and I do follow the Alyssa Turney Twitter account on there, the trial from Michael Turney was supposed to start this past week. Of course, it didn't because of all the COVID stuff. Once again, I'm once again talking about a trial that's probably going to be happening in 2021. But I did not even realize that they were far enough along that a jury had been selected and everything else for this to even be happening. Like I said, sometimes just get caught up in my own work. I try to keep up on all the disappearances we've covered, but I did, of course, know earlier this year that Michael had been charged with Alyssa's murder. To my knowledge, she still's not been found, so this is going to be one of those no-body murder cases. But yeah, that trial was supposed to start this past week. Of course, it did not. I don't know if it's been rescheduled. I'm sure it will be. And so this is another trial that we will be talking about when it happens in 2021. At least I hope it's in 2021. Let's hope that all these things can happen in 2021. I guess I shouldn't say that's for sure going to happen. Who knows what 2021 is going to be like. Next, Bonnie and Jeremy Degus. The Hillsborough County Sheriff's Office started a podcast, and it was called Unfinished Business. Unfortunately, it doesn't look like they've done an episode for a while, but I thought that it was very well done. And Bonnie and Jeremy's disappearance was one of their cases that they covered. And I think that's notable since Bonnie and Jeremy disappeared well over 20 years ago. To be included in a not just a podcast, but a sheriff's podcast is something. And I'm glad that Hillsborough did that. I wish they would also covered some of the other disappearances that are within their jurisdiction that we've covered on Unfound, for example, Lucinda Hewells, which goes way back to the 1980s. But so if you've not heard that coverage yet, I would urge you to go to the Hillsborough County Sheriff's Office and find their podcast section and listen to the coverage. Now, you should know that it's not as in-depth as what we did on Unfound. They don't name any names like we did when we covered that disappearance in 2018. Just you have to remember, it's a police department doing it, so they're going to handle that kind of information differently. But it's certainly think worth your while to listen to that. I just wish they would have continued the series. I think they did about, 8 episodes of the podcast series, and I don't know if they've done any since. I don't think they've done any in the last month or 6 weeks. If anybody in Hillsborough County Sheriff's Office hears this episode, I hope they will continue them in 2021. The other issue with Bonnie and Jeremy's disappearance, as far as an update, is I just don't know what it is. I don't have an answer to this. I don't know why some disappearances seem to bring out the kooks and some don't. And I of course, we know when the issue is very well-known disappearances like Mara Murray, Jennifer Kesse, Brian Schaefer, there are a lot of very reasonable people who have theories about those disappearances, surely. But there's that small percentage that it seemed to be just, as I say, kookville. And you realize why that happens in these well-known disappearances. Whereas with Bonnie and Jeremy's, my impression is that their disappearances are certainly not as well known as some of those others I just mentioned. I wish it was, but it's not. But this has been one of those disappearances that isn't as well known, but it still has gotten its share of kooks for some reason. And I don't, because usually the lesser known a disappearance, the less chance you're going to have any kooks involved, people coming out of the woodwork and saying things. Well, Bonnie and Jeremy's disappearance for years has had some. The first one, kook that comes to mind, is this guy who was saying that he was actually Jeremy Degus. And even though it was proven that was all untrue and everything, he just went after Bonnie's family, particularly Bonnie's mother, who was a guest on Unfound, for years. And finally, law enforcement decided to finally do something about it. Notorious. In fact, I think at one point he even contacted my assistant, Emily. Well, the reason I'm even bringing this up is because just within the last 2 months, I had somebody contact me. And it's after doing this over 4 years, you kind of get a feel for this, that even though the email seems perfectly fine, there's still a part of you saying, I bet this is going to go in a strange direction real fast. Even though the words, everything's fine. It seems like, just on its surface, it seems like a perfectly concerned listener. But then you're starting to think about, I know this is going to go wrong. And I was right. And this guy ended up saying, oh, yeah, I saw Bonnie several days after the disappearance date and all of this. And I just had to block the guy. Once again, I don't know why this is. Because for a vast majority of the disappearances that we've covered on Unfound, I've never gotten one kook email. Not one kook message at all. But then with Bonnie and Jeremy's, for some reason, we had this guy who was pretending to be Jeremy for a long time. And now, more recently, maybe it's the same guy. I don't even know. I don't know. Maybe it's the same guy. But as soon as he started talking about and I asked him a few questions about it, I'm going to have to let this guy go. So, that's what happened within the last few months. I'm not even sure if this guy even knows that I blocked him, but I did. So he may be trying to send me messages since then, and I'm not getting them, and I don't want to get them. If he thinks he knows something, he shouldn't. If he's so believable and he believes, he should just be going to the police, not having a conversation with me and trying to prove something to me. Don't try to prove it to me. Go try to prove it to the police. They're the ones that eventually have to investigate it. You want to talk to me? Okay, but at some point, if I think that you're BSing, I'm just going to block you. So, just, it wasn't as simple as me reading the first line that was from Kooksville and me blocking. I did try to talk to the guy, and it just wasn't working out. Nobody got nasty or anything, but I was asking him questions, and it just wasn't making a lot of sense to me. Well, if you saw her and you knew she was missing, why didn't you do something about it? You mean, I said, are you telling me that she's just showing up where you're working, even though she knows all these people are looking for her, and she's just showing up as if nothing's going on? Really? So I had that happen. I don't know if I mentioned that in the live show. I don't think I have. I think this is the first time I'm airing this particular piece of information. So just don't have an answer to that. Why some of these lesser known, and this is, I'm not trying to offend anybody, but we all know that Bonnie and Jeremy's disappearance, not as well known as Jennifer Kesse, which is another Florida disappearance. And you should know Bonnie and Jeremy's disappearance happened right over there in Hillsborough County, which is where Tampa is. So I just don't know why some of these disappearances bring out the kooks and then a large majority don't. It's just so weird. Maybe I'll figure that out one of these days. Next, Travis Murrow. I think I'm going to say the same thing that I did back in August. It seems to me that police in the area of where his truck was found, there in Oklahoma, they seem to be poking around and talking to people, but I'm just not sure. I've not heard anything to lead me to believe that it's going anywhere. I have been in contact with his ex-wife, Christy, who was the guest for Travis's episode. I've not talked to her recently, but it does seem that they're out there trying to talk to some people, maybe people that Travis might have known in the area. The woman that he was allegedly going to see that evening, that night when he disappeared. So it's good that they're doing something. I don't know where it's taking them, but they're poking around and trying to talk to people is certainly a good sign. I have to tell you that I know that I wrote about it in the blog for Patreon, and I'm thinking, although I did not go back and check it, I can certainly believe that I might have written that foul play might have happened to Travis, but I don't know. This is one I think that's still very open to interpretation. What I keep coming back to in Travis's disappearance, it doesn't seem, even though I've been told by locals that it makes sense, they've not explained it to me to me in a way that it makes sense to me, a guy who's never been there. So if they can't explain it to me, then I don't know how good their explanation is. Where he was coming from and allegedly where he was going, where his truck was found, was not on that route. And I think I did a YouTube video showing that. That's the part that's always going to puzzle me, that if he was going from point A to point B, where his truck was found was not along that line. And until somebody can figure out why that is, I think that this disappearance is going to be very difficult to solve. But I appreciate that law enforcement in the area is giving it a shot by talking to people who knew Travis, who might have had a problem with Travis, and people that he might have been planning to see while he was down in that area of the state. The next disappearance, Megan Lancaster. And this is what I would call fairly recent news. Of course, earlier this year, Mike Moran was indicted for sex trafficking, among other charges. I don't know if he's actually been in custody, if he's been let out on bail or something. Actually, I'm not too sure about that. And I preface all of this by saying there is no proof that Mike Moran had anything to do with Megan's disappearance. Certainly possible. Mike and Megan knew each other. His name and number were in her little black book, as were many other prominent people in the Portsmouth, Ohio area, including the chief of police, at least the chief of police at the time that Megan disappeared. But I don't know if there's any proof. I've not seen any proof that Mike could have had anything to do with Megan's disappearance. But it is part of the low overall issue, I think, in Portsmouth, Ohio, is what has actually been going on there. And why would Mike Moran know Megan Lancaster? And it seemed like they knew each other more than just him maybe being her attorney at one point. It seemed like it was more than that. In addition, it seems like Mike knew all of these other women kind of who were like Megan a little too well. And we know by this time, you, of course, know all the charges against him. Well, he's decided that he is going to represent himself regarding his trial whenever that happens. I think this is another one where we're going to be talking about it in 2021. How many is that now? 4 disappearances and trials that are connected to them? 5, maybe? But it seems he's going to be representing himself. He is a lawyer, so maybe that makes sense. I've read some articles, people saying he probably shouldn't do that, even though he is a lawyer. There are, of course, many minuses regarding representing yourself, but there are a couple pluses, too, in that Mike, as his own attorney, will be able to do his own opening and closing, in which he can frame the case any way he likes. And he gets to talk about it in his own words, in contrast to a lawyer doing it for him. But he's going to represent himself. I don't know where it's going to go, but I want to temper everybody's expectations, thinking, well, from this is how Megan's disappearance is going to get solved. There's nothing that I've seen so far to believe that. It very well could be, but certainly nothing that I would say that points in that direction. We have to understand that Megan Lancaster had a very risky lifestyle, and who knows what could have happened to her. We just don't know. So that's the update that kind of is connected to Megan's disappearance, but I prepare you for the fact that Mike Moran might go to jail for the rest of his life, and there might not be anything that comes out in his trial that has anything to do with Megan's disappearance. Just want to prepare you for that. Next one is Austin Pevo. As I just stated with Megan's case, this is another one where we will be looking for a trial in 2021. The trial for the 3 men who allegedly murdered Austin was supposed to happen in June of last year. Instead, all of their trials in Idaho will be happening in 2021. I'm not sure if any dates have been picked out, but I have to believe that it will be at as soon as possible. We're still unclear, although I haven't spoken to Austin's mother, Susan, recently. It's still unclear what actually happened in that house that morning that Austin was dropped off. Susan has not told me anything. She's not told me any theories or anything that she's heard through the grapevine. Just don't know. I just don't know what could have gone so wrong so quickly when it doesn't seem that Austin had a problem with any of these guys. Remember that the night before, allegedly some other person pulled a knife on him, and then the next morning he's seemingly getting killed by 3 people who weren't that guy from the night before. So, still have not heard any theories regarding why these men murdered Austin. If I hear them, if they sound possible to me, I'll think about passing them along to you. But so far, as of me recording this episode, I've not heard any reasons why Austin ended up dead. This is going to sound like a broken record, if some of you even remember what records are. I know we have some young listeners out there who probably have never listened to a record. In fact, even at my age at 50, records were kind of already on their way out by the time that I even started realizing what commercial music, I guess you'd call it, was. Having been born in 1970, by the time I started getting into music, maybe late 70s, early 80s, already there were cassettes were coming along, and then a few years after that, CDs. But in any case, this is going to sound like a broken record, but Jonathan Estes, another trial, how do I say that? Trial is coming up regarding his wife, Cindy. This trial has nothing to do with Jonathan's disappearance, unlike Austin Pevo's. But this Bobcat, this piece of machinery that she sold shortly after Jonathan went missing, that's still not been decided. The trial was delayed a couple times, and now here we are at the end of 2020, and still nothing's been done. I don't know how badly the sentence will be if she is proven to be guilty of this. I don't know. But it still hasn't happened. And just like, I guess, Mike Moran's trial that will happen in Ohio in 2021, I'm not sure Cindy being on trial is going to enlighten us at all regarding Jonathan's disappearance. Once again, I feel like I have to prepare you for that. But Cindy still due to go on trial, and we'll see what happens. I think her defense is going to be that she was entitled to sell that, being that it was Jonathan's, but Jonathan's family, the Esteses, are under the belief that the Bobcat was still theirs, still their father's. Cindy had no right to sell it. Going to sound like a broken record again, but in this case, this trial will have something to do with the disappearance, and that is Kamisha Hollis, the father of her children. If you remember Kamisha, her man liked to, when she went to work, he demanded that she have her phone on video, live video, so he could watch her from home, keep an eye on her, and was very, very, very controlling. Probably one of the most controlling men that we've ever discussed on Unfound, and that is certainly saying something, giving the lights of, for example, David Perry with Kelly Rothwell's disappearance. But he is supposed to go on trial this coming year. I was very happy to hear when the DA, it was over a year ago now, that the DA came out and offered up a lot of reasons that they feel very comfortable going to trial, even though Kamisha's remains have not been found, video evidence, etc. So that's another trial that will be happening in 2021. And like Austin Pevo's, this will actually have something to do with the disappearance. In fact, it will have everything to do with the disappearance. The difference is Austin Pevo's remains have been found. Kamisha's haven't. So we'll see how that goes. Next disappearance I want to discuss, and certainly big news in this one, is Tyler North. This is one that I'm not saying there for sure is going to be a trial in 2021, but there may be, but that is not the update. The actual update is that Tyler's ex-wife, I think we called her Michelle in the episode, but I think that's her middle name. Her first name is actually Lena, Lena, but I will call her Michelle. Tyler's ex-wife Michelle and her boyfriend Jeremy Lewis, who was a sheriff's deputy at one point, they have been charged with Tyler's murder. Now, this has been a couple months since this happened. Like I said, I recorded this in December 2020, but I think this all happened in October. So it's been a couple months, but to my knowledge, no remains have been discovered regarding Tyler. So I guess that means that, of course, if his remains have not been found and they won't be found, this will be something where they'll go to trial and it'll be a no-body case, just like Kamisha Hollis's, for example. That these two are the possible perpetrators of the disappearance is not a surprise. I do have to say, though, that I am at least a little bit surprised that these charges have been brought without a body. I think that it was fairly obvious from the interview that I did for Tyler's disappearance that these two should have been considered the main suspects, and it does sound like Michelle lured Tyler to that park with promises of a sexual get-together, and that when Tyler showed up there, it ended up being a trap, being lured there so that Michelle and Jeremy could do something to Tyler. If you will remember, Tyler's truck was eventually found elsewhere, burned to a crisp. But still, Tyler's remains, to my knowledge, have not been found. I have read, I think, a couple things out there about allegedly bones were found or anything. To my knowledge, nothing's come of any of that. So as of the recording of this episode in late 2020, December 2020, his remains have not been found. I guess it gives people time to find his remains before these two are brought to trial. That would be nice if remains could be found and be positively identified as Tyler. But it seems that the DA, the prosecutor, where this is happening, is comfortable enough charging these two with murder and going to trial without Tyler's remains. So that's of course a big deal. I don't think it's any surprise that these two have been charged. I think that they were charged. It's not a surprise that these two are being seen as the perpetrators. I just think maybe there's some surprise out there that they have been charged and there will be a trial at some point in the future, unless they ask for a deal. But any deal, you know how I feel about this, any deal must include them identifying where Tyler's remains are, and those remains are found there and identified as being Tyler's, not just something like, oh yeah, he's over in these woods somewhere. That's just not good enough for me. Kind of like what happened in Angie Arnell's case. Or Teresa Butler's disappearance. Two situations that I can just tell you are totally unacceptable. Giving killers deals and the remains still haven't been found. I'm not for that, and I never will be for that. Next update, this was a special episode that happened in 2019, and that was my interview with Steve Pankey, a man who is suspected, alleged to have killed Janelle Matthews in Colorado way back in the 1980s. Steve was on the program over a year ago. I did a 3-hour interview with him. He said, of course, he is not responsible for Janelle's murder, but just within the last couple months, Steve was taken into custody and been charged with Janelle's murder, among other charges. Of course, the murder charge being the number one issue. I have to admit that as I've talked about this behind the scenes, I've talked to my assistant Cherie about this, if I can speak for her. She is much more confident that Steve killed Janelle than I am. I would never put somebody's certainty at 100%, but if Cherie's is at 95%, mine is probably at 50%. And if hers is at 75%, mine is at 25%. There's a considerable difference between the way I think about this and the way this is just an example. I bring up Cherie because probably more than any of my assistants, she and I talk over theories and disappearances more than any of the other assistants. And we have shortly talked about this one, and our opinions do differ. But in talking to Cherie, the point that I've brought up is that I compare this a little bit to Kamisha Hollis's disappearance, which of course I just mentioned a few minutes ago. That when we covered Kamisha's disappearance and I found out all this information, and then I heard they were charging her man with murder, I was like, well, I'm sure hoping they have more than that. And it turned out, just I think a few weeks after the episode aired, it was true that they did have more items that were not covered in the interview, simply because I don't think that my guest for that episode knew about these things, but they ended up being real, and those items will be evidence in the trial, even though Kamisha's remains have still not been found. Whereas I compare that to Janelle Matthews and Steve being charged with her murder, and then the DA coming out, and before he came forward, I kind of felt the same way, like I said, I did about Kamisha's. Well, if they're going to charge Steve with murder, I hope they have more than what I know. And the big difference is that when the DA came out and has done some interviews regarding being charging Steve, he's not offered much more than what we covered in the episode. A distinct difference from my experience with Kamisha Hollis's. And he sounds like, and you have to understand, there's no law that says that a prosecutor or a DA has to reveal his entire case to the public before it goes to trial. There's nothing regarding that. But in watching the interview, the statement, watching him give the statement and reading what he said, it was more along the lines of just trust me. And Steve has a defense attorney, and the defense attorney kind of, I guess at times maybe even I feel or sound like Steve's defense attorney. The defense attorney said the same things that I would have said in his position. That there's nothing connecting Steve to Janelle. There's nothing saying that he was on that street on that night at that time. Frankly, Steve, because of some issues that Steve has mentally, he might have talked himself into being charged with Janelle's murder. We now know it's a murder. It was a disappearance for, of course, 30-some years, but we now know it's a murder. It just doesn't give me, I mean, if the point is to charge the right person and make sure that person goes to jail with a murder, there's nothing that I've heard since Steve was taken into custody that lets me know that that's actually going to happen. The other big issue that I think is a telltale sign is that Steve was not remanded without bail or bond, that he's going to have to stay in jail until the trial starts. If he can raise $5 million or however all that works, not an expert on it, he's allowed to get out and be a free man until the trial starts. Which I think, that seems uncommon to me when charging somebody with murder, especially somebody like Steve. Maybe he has to wear an ankle bracelet, etc. But it just seems a little bit weird to me, and I'm just wondering if that is maybe a kind of a sign that the prosecution might not be as confident in their case as they're leading the public to believe. In fact, I know some of the listeners who saw this news recently pointed that out, very surprised that Steve had a way to get out of jail before the trial started. So we'll just have to see. All I can tell you is at this point, the prosecution, DA's office, has not given me a lot of confidence that they have all the evidence needed to prove beyond a shadow of a doubt, beyond a reasonable doubt, that Steve murdered Janelle, where it seems to me the defense is making some good arguments, and it's really based on what I personally know about Steve and the circumstances that happened back there in the 1980s. I can't say much more than that, but I will tell you this. I think there's a good chance in 2021 at some point I will be doing another interview with someone concerning Janelle's murder, but I can't say any more than that. But I think there's a pretty good chance that we'll be covering this murder. It was a disappearance, became a murder in 2021. Whether Steve is found guilty or innocent, not guilty, whether a trial happens or not, I think at some point I will be doing an extensive interview with somebody else, I can't say who it is, regarding Janelle's murder. So we'll just, once again, another trial that we may be seeing in 2021. Maybe. Okay, the next disappearance I want to talk about for a few moments is the disappearance of Cameron Remmer. If you will remember, in 2019, I guess the episode concerning Cameron came out a little over a year ago. I'm recording this in December of 2020, so December, maybe November of 2019, I released that interview that I did with his mother, and that was the culmination of almost a year's work of trying to look into Cameron's disappearance a lot more closely. And I think that we were very successful doing that. I got to talk to some of the people who encountered Cameron that night that he disappeared. And if you will remember, I was able to track down, with the help of a guy named Chris, who worked at the Fairmont at the time, I was able to track down the two security guards working at the Fairmont that they seemingly, allegedly encountered him, and they were the ones who escorted Cameron off the property that night. Now, you may also remember that one of them had some interaction through email with my assistant Cherie and really kind of sort of blew her off. And then in the other situation with the other security guard, in trying to contact him, he actually contacted Cameron's mother directly and basically said that I shouldn't be listened to, I'm a kook, and that I have an agenda and everything else, which to this day, of course, we all know is untrue. If you listen to Unfound long enough, you know that that statement is certainly not true. And it just raises more suspicions that something did happen to Cameron, and it had something to do with the Fairmont. The way these two guys reacted to us trying to talk to them. Just some of the strangest responses that I think we've gotten in 4 years, almost 200 disappearances of doing the program. Now, so just to remind you of all of that. So move up to April of this year, of 2020, there was a picture that was put out there of a guy who some may say looks like Cameron on the streets of San Francisco, and some people believe that this is Cameron. I'm not so sure. Many of you, the listeners, do not think it's him, but I think the most important part, and the reason we're talking about Cameron in this update, is 8 months later, we still have no idea. And easy for me to talk, I'm not there. Easy for me to talk, I've never been to San Francisco. Easy for me to talk that being that I'm not a homeless person expert, we talk about homelessness because many of the people on the streets of the United States probably are in some missing persons file somewhere in the United States. And we also know from studies that have been done that homelessness, at least in the United States, can be connected to mental illness. And I don't think anybody denies that Cameron did struggle with mental illness in his adult life. His mother was more than straightforward about that during the interview. But I'm still confused of why 8 months later, when his picture is put out there, and there are people who do this work in that area, know where this guy is. Since that picture, I've been told that he's been seen over and over again. I don't know if he necessarily has a pattern of behavior going out at the every day at the same time or anything, but my perception is this guy seems to be easy to find. And still, we don't know. And I got to tell you, we just have to do better than that. I don't know how anybody can find this timeline of 8 months of waiting to be acceptable. Once again, easy for me to talk. But you know what? I do missing persons cases too. I spent almost a year, me personally, with some help from my assistants, on Cameron's disappearance. I know what it's like to try to find information, try to find things out that is the difficult work. Difficult work. You have to be patient. You have to get lucky. You have to surely rely on the kindness of others, as I had to in trying to track down some of these people that I got to talk to who encountered Cameron. At that point, it would have been 8 years ago. Now it's 9 years ago. So I know what it's like to work hard on this. And in fact, this is something that I do 7 days a week. So when I hear that, well, they have a lot to do and it's a huge problem in San Francisco and you have to understand that, well, yeah, I know. I don't know about that specific situation, but I know what it's like to work hard on this stuff. And I happen to believe that if I, in my travels in the Clearwater, St. Petersburg, Tampa area of Florida, were to encounter a person who I thought was missing, whether the person was covered on Unfound or not, and I went to the extent of taking pictures of this person and putting it online and asking people, do you think that this is John Smith? And then 8 months later, it was still unknown, where, I'm supposed to be an expert in the missing persons community. I think people would start looking at me and saying, does Ed really know what he's doing or not? I think that's what they would think. And so I wouldn't allow that to happen. I think that if I'm going to be public enough to put somebody's picture out there and claim, hey, this might be John Smith, and still 8 months later, there's no proof of this, even though this John Smith is known to be in a certain area all the time, maybe not every day, but at least once a week or once every couple weeks, that you might get creative in trying to really find out who this person is. I think. And so I have to admit, does it sound like I'm a little bit of a hard ass? I guess so. But that's the way I am. And I'm surely that way for my guests of the program. And unfortunately, I think this kind of fulfills something that I thought back in April when this all came up. Of course, I do not believe it's Cameron, but I don't know if my opinion on who it is or who it isn't matters. What I care about is just determining who it is. If it's not Cameron, then who is it? Who is this guy? But what I was going to say is I think it fulfills something that I kind of felt and thought back at the time. In fact, I might have even expressed it to my assistants, maybe not publicly, but behind the scenes, is that I just wouldn't have been surprised if 8 months later we still don't know. And guess what? We still don't know. And once again, because I have experience in this. People taking pictures and we still don't know answers. I mean, if I were to happen upon a missing person, a person who I thought was a missing person, let's say it's Jennifer Kessie, let's just say, and I happened upon a woman that looked like her, living on the streets of Pinellas County. Let's just say, I don't, of course, believe that's going on. And I took a picture of her. I think everybody's next expectation for me and my assistants, even though they don't live here, would be, you know what, Ed, you got to go figure that out. I think that sounds important. And it would be important. And I wouldn't leave it, I personally would not let it go for 8 months. I think that if you're going to put something out there and put the picture out there and then try to attach a name to it, then you have the responsibility to follow through, and I think you should be able to follow through quicker than 8 months. I don't know what the line is. I don't know if it's a month. I don't know if it's 6 weeks. I don't know if it's 5 months. I don't know. But 8 months sounds like enough time. It sounds like enough time to me. Once again, having done this for over 4 years, covering almost 200 disappearances. So that's kind of where I stand right now. I want you to know, this is not the attitude the Cameron's family has. This is my own personal belief system regarding all of this. If this would have been something that's just private, that wouldn't have been made public, if pictures were taken and just sent to Cameron's family and it never got out into the news and on Facebook and everywhere else, then of course I wouldn't even know about it. I don't even know if Cameron's mother would even tell me about it. She has no responsibility to do that, but maybe she would, maybe she wouldn't. But if this was all under wraps, then we wouldn't know about it, and I guess this person who took the picture could just work at his or her own pace. But when you're going to put this stuff out in the public, then my opinion is you have a higher responsibility to see that this is resolved in a very quick fashion. And I think that you then have a responsibility to the public and not just the family. That is my attitude. So, but Cameron Remmer, it may be him, it may not be him. We still don't know. And I'm just wondering, is it going to be a year from now and I'm still giving this same speech regarding his disappearance? You know what I personally think, and I could certainly be wrong, that his disappearance had something to do with the Fairmont. Absolutely could be wrong. And it's certainly, if he is on the streets of San Francisco and that is he, then certainly I am wrong. And you know what? I can live with that. And I hope Cameron is alive. I hope that is him. I do not believe that is to be so, but I hope it is. I'm not saying this because I want to be right. I'm perfectly fine being wrong. So this isn't about that. I just think people need to work harder. They need to work quicker. If they're going to put it out there that they think that they're on the trail of finding Cameron Remmer, that's what I think. I would contrast that to, I've never been to San Francisco, but within 8 months in 2019, I was able to figure out the 2 names of the guys who were the security guards at the Fairmont that night. And I did that with ever stepping foot in California. And I still managed to do all of the episodes in 2019 that were done. And still working on, 45, 47 disappearance episodes. And I was still able to do that for Cameron's family. And get at least a little bit more information regarding that night. So if I can do that while continuing to do all of my other work, then I think other people should be able to do that too. Those are my expectations. These expectations are no different than my own. I have very high expectations for myself and my assistants. So I have high expectations for people who choose to do this as well. This is a choice. And so if you choose to do this, the expectations are high. And the expectations, I think, should be that something like this can be resolved quicker than 8 months. Okay, the next disappearance I want to talk about, and this is certainly in contrast to what I just talked about, Cameron Remmer, who disappeared in 2011. We're going back to the 1940s for the disappearance of Mary Jane Van Gilder. And this was a disappearance that was covered in 2020. So within the past year, this is a disappearance that happened over 70 years ago. And still new information is being found on it by people who are doing great work out there. So once again, I contrast that to Cameron Remmer's disappearance from 2011. You have a picture of him. We still don't know who he is. This guy is. I just want you to think about that. Well, after Unfound covered Mary Jane Van Gilder's disappearance, we had Officer Adam Turner, who is doing fantastic work, probably some of the best police work that we've covered in any disappearance since Unfound got started. A lot of new information came out, and I'm not going to go through all of it because I don't want to steal somebody else's thunder, but I would say that you should go to the YouTube channel, Mysterious West Virginia, and it's Mysterious space WV. Mysterious WV, to watch the second part of a video. I think this came out maybe in August of this year, August of 2020, in which it goes through a lot of information that came out after we featured Mary Jane's disappearance. A lot more information about her job and where she was living. Since the episode came out, that some remains have been ruled out. And there's still this big question that was, I think we talked about in the episode, but even more so, it's even clearer now that in her reason for leaving that job that she had there in Ohio, where she was seemingly living by herself, her reasoning was more home duties. And this is a little difficult for everybody to understand because, once again, to our knowledge, she was living by herself there. So what kind of home duties could it have been that would take her away from that job? We know this is a different time in American history, different culture, and you might think, at least at that time in the 1940s, that could have meant, well, her husband expected her to stay at home and take care of the kids. Once again, a little bit different back then than it is now. But that doesn't seem to be the case. So I think there's a thinking out there that I could certainly subscribe to, that this idea that she quit that job because she had more home duties was a lie and something else was going on. We just don't know. But I think the other point that's important in this update is that what was discovered is, I think if you go back and listen to that interview and the coverage of Mary Jane's disappearance, there was talk about how it is believed a lot of records from that area that could contain more information on Mary Jane were destroyed due to a fire that happened some years later. That fire did happen and many records were destroyed, but what they've discovered since the episode, and just since the last update episode at the end of August, is that records on Mary Jane, new ones, still existed. They found them somewhere else. And if you go to the, once again, YouTube channel Mysterious WV, West Virginia, that you will hear what some of those new records say. Now, what does this all mean in getting closer to figuring out what happened to her? I don't know. There's people working on it. There are people working on it, Adam Turner and others who are doing very, very good work. And, if I live to be 80 years old, do I think that this might get solved? Maybe. I certainly would not rule it out. Just the progress that's been made in the past year is considerable. I mean, especially since the disappearance is over 70 years old. So you never know what can happen. I mean, nobody thought that Eric Franks' car was ever going to appear again, and it did. So you just never know. And I just want to send if I'm going to criticize some people regarding Cameron Remmer's disappearance and how they've involved themselves into it, with still no results, then on the other hand, I'm going to certainly applaud those people who've gotten involved in Mary Jane Van Gilder's disappearance, over 70 years old, and finding information, bringing it to the public, explaining it to the public, how it all happened. That's the kind of good work that we do applaud on Unfound. Next, Eric Alvarado. Not necessarily an update, but I just want to remind you that we did cover his disappearance. I did talk to Dr. Grace Telesco back, I guess that would have been now in September. Man, it seems like yesterday. Back in September, that was the first disappearance we chose to talk about in her new series that she's doing on YouTube on Thursday evenings. I think that they'll be coming back again in January. In fact, Grace and I have talked about continuing our interview schedule in January, February, and hopefully if COVID ever goes away, we can make some of these things happen in person, which would be fantastic. And I was just telling her that I think before the last interview I did with her that there is a Nova Southeastern branch 20 minutes away from where I live. Of course, she is not there. She's down near Miami. But she had always said that there was a branch of Nova Southeastern up here. And I was like, well, I wonder where that is. And I just happened to drive past it. I'd been by it many times, never paid attention. And then all of a sudden, there it was. But we hope in 2021 to be able to make it possible that we do some of these interviews in person, sitting in the same room, and getting to meet each other in person, because I've never met Dr. Telesco in person yet. But in any case, back in September, we did talk about Eric Alvarado's disappearance. And I think what we came away with from that in talking for that hour is very much similar to what happened after we originally covered the disappearance on Unfound. A lot of different possibilities. You don't like it that the next door neighbor was the investigator. That seems like a little bit of a conflict of interest. Does seem that Eric had some things going on, putting the video cameras inside his house. Could be seen as maybe a little paranoia going on there. He was involved in illegal drug business, maybe had some beefs with some people. And then you look at the car being abandoned in Arkansas and the dogs getting killed. Just so much information regarding that. So much factual information. And still just not sure what happened. And so that was both the response to the original episode and then my interview with Dr. Telesco. But if you've not listened to my interview that I did with Dr. Telesco back in September, please go to the Unfound Podcast Channel and do a search for it. Next disappearance is Chris Sanders. You should know that his wife at the time, I'm going to leave her name out of this, although I think we did use it during the episode, the interview that I did for that episode. She contacted me on Facebook a couple months ago. She wasn't very happy about the coverage of her husband Chris's disappearance. You'll remember that he was on a job in another part of Texas. She was not near there, and he was living in this RV park. And allegedly, he just walked off onto the highway, and that was the last that anybody has ever seen of him. There are people who maybe believe that didn't actually happen. Could something have happened in his trailer because the TV was still on and the door to his SUV or his car was still open, or maybe the alarm was going off. Just some unique things that I think draw into question the idea that he actually walked off. But she messaged me, wasn't happy with the coverage. I don't know why. Because I got the feeling that, frankly, I think she just wanted to be the star. I think she wanted to do the interview because she wanted all the attention. That's the feeling that I got. Having said that, I'm going to state for the record, she can be mad about the coverage, but I'm here to tell you, Chris Sanders' wife, I don't think he had anything to do with his disappearance. And I think that was fairly obvious in the episode. And I know that when I wrote the Patreon blog that was not my conclusion. So if you want to be disappointed that you were not interviewed, okay, but no one here at Unfound thinks you had anything to do with it. Now, as far as Chris's family, they may have a different opinion. I can't do anything about that. They are entitled certainly to their opinions. But I've told them my thoughts, but they do not have to agree with me at all. So if you are listening, the reason we didn't interview you is because we just don't like to interview people that possibly maybe could have had something to do with the disappearance. We want to make sure in Unfound's life that if we're going to have people on the program that they are not suspects. Of course, the exception would be Steve Pankey, but that was already understood going in. That he may very well have killed Janelle Matthews. So, that's the reason, Chris's wife, that we didn't interview you, but don't take that personally. That's how we handle it all the time. And you want to be mad? I just don't think you had anything to do with his disappearance. So I think that something else could have happened. Maybe somebody else did something to him. I'm certainly open to that. But I'm just as open to the idea that he really did walk off. And I think that walking off is a concept that I think is becoming clearer and clearer the more we do this program, that the more you see about disappearances, maybe you read about disappearances that maybe aren't covered on Unfound, you start realizing that maybe more people walk off than you think. I'm not saying it's the difference between 5% and 25%, but it may be the difference between 5% of disappearances and 15%. Maybe the number is a lot higher than we all realize. So I'm open to the idea that Chris really did walk off to parts unknown. It would just be easier to think that if the TV wasn't left on in his trailer, some of the people's stories maybe don't quite match up, the alarm's still going off on his SUV. That all adds to the mystery and makes people think, including myself possibly, that there was foul play. But Chris Sanders' wife, I personally don't think he had anything to do with his disappearance. Julie Weflin. If you remember, John Polos, a former co-worker of hers, was the guest. And John continues, and I enjoy this. I appreciate it. Once in a while, he just checks in with me. Maybe once a month, he'll send me a text just telling me what he's doing. And something that transpired since the last update episode in August is that he got to speak to someone in Catherine Ray Gregory's family. And I'll just leave it at that. Someone in her family, but I'm not going to say who. And John admitted, after talking to this person, that his opinion has changed. Of course, at the time, when John was on the program earlier in 2020, he believed that Will Parks could have been responsible for Catherine's disappearance. And I did discover that at the time of her disappearance, he kind of sort of lived close to where Catherine lived, within a mile or mile and a half. It's those dates seemed and locations seemed to intersect. But I'm not sure I ever believed that. And in fact, in knowing what I did, once again, earlier this year, knowing what I did about Catherine's disappearance, this seemed to be more like a situation where her husband could have had something to do with her disappearance, mainly because when you look at it, it certainly does play out similar to Angela Green's disappearance, Marion Hurley's disappearance, Rosemary Rapp's disappearance. That's the reason that I personally came to that conclusion, even knowing just the general public facts. And it turns out that in John Polos getting to speak to someone in Catherine's family, that's what her family has thought this whole time too. So John has now backed off the idea that Will Parks is responsible for Catherine's disappearance, but he certainly, of course, still continues to believe that Will is responsible for Julie's disappearance. And even so, I'm still very up in the air on that, and I think in the update that I did, I think I already talked about this previously, but after the episode came out regarding Julie Weflin, an investigator who is responsible for Julie's case all these years later sent me an email essentially saying that John Poulos has no idea what he's talking about. Just got to throw that out there. And you know that I was a little bit critical about John's, the logic of his methods. I don't question his passion. He's great at collecting information and all of that. But I can't help but think still that there's some confirmation bias going on, that because he wants it to be Will Parks, that he'll try to make it look. I'm not saying he's forging information, but we all get in that mode. We think something happened, and then we're presented with information that could take us in a different direction. We kind of blow it off. So I think there's continues to be a little bit of confirmation bias going on in John's work, but in the end, he still might be right that Will Parks is responsible. But they're still trying to get on the property. Of course, Will Parks is deceased. That's why we eventually did cover Julie's disappearance, because John finally felt comfortable talking about Will Parks now that Will was dead. I get that. That's John's choice, and I was certainly happy to have John on the program. In the end, it's up to you to determine John's methods and what you think happened to Julie. But he's still continuing to work on it. I think that's great. I wish, even though I may question some of John's methods, I wish there were more John Pouloses out there. Honestly. I'm criticizing him a little bit, but I wish more people had his passion and his stick-to-itiveness. We certainly need more of that in the missing persons community, coming from just the regular public people who are teachers or engineers or accountants who then in their spare time give a disappearance a couple hours a week. We need that. We certainly do. So that's the update. Kind of backing away from thinking that Will Parks had anything to do with Catherine's disappearance. I'm not going to get into some of the other specifics that John got into regarding Catherine's husband. I know who he is, and I'm just going to leave it at that, but his name will not be mentioned in this update. Maybe we will devote an episode to Catherine's disappearance in 2021. Maybe that'll happen. I don't think it's going to happen soon, but depending on John, depending on Catherine's family and how they feel about all this, I'd certainly love to do an in-depth episode about her disappearance. Now that I think that we can say that her disappearance is not connected to Julie's. All right, the next disappearance I'm going to cover in this update episode. This is update episode number 7, and you should know that we're now into, of course, disappearances that we covered in 2020. So we're more than halfway through them. I think we have about 7 or 8 more to go. But I want to talk about Christopher Mittendorf and Christina Branham. You should know, I don't know if I mentioned this at the time when it happened. This happened about a month ago, maybe 5 weeks ago, 6 weeks ago, so maybe early November of 2020. Rusty Murphy contacted me through Messenger on Facebook. I'd never spoken to him before. I'd never tried to contact him before. But as all of you know, I'm fairly easy to find. In fact, I'm probably the easiest podcast host to reach in the history of the world, because I'm always online. I'm always on Messenger, always somewhere, monitoring what's going on, even when I'm at disc golf tournaments. Well, he messaged me, and I'm going to read the exchanges that he and I had. Now, if you forget, Rusty Murphy was the guy who, after Chris and Christina disappeared, he was the guy that went down to Chris's mother's house and took that box out. If you remember that, maybe that rings a bell. And I have had a chance to talk to Christopher's mother about this. All right. she'd changed numbers, so I had a little difficult time tracking her down because she had gotten a new phone with a new number. But we finally did get to talk about all of this, and we are, I think, in agreement about what I'm going to read. So here we go. This is Rusty Murphy, and I just got through. Listen, if I make some speech mistakes here, it's because I'm just reading what he wrote. Okay, I'm not going to correct his own typing. So if it sounds weird, it's just the way he wrote it. Yes, this is Rusty Murphy. I just got through listen to your Unfound on Chris Mittendorf and Christina Branham. First off, is nothing but a bunch of lies that their mom told you. Second of all, they call me to come get the box there. Tomorrow I will do it. Interview with you. Call me, and he gives his number, and I can tell you the truth, the whole truth about the lies. She said, she meaning Christopher's mother. She said, y'all, and my test on polygraph came back clean. Tell her to get her back straight and quit using my name. Is that all? Y'all use my last name. Who give you permission? I need to talk to my lawyer because I got one. I responded, and you should know this kind of email is not unusual. I wouldn't say I get them all the time, but when somebody comes forward and says, well, your interview is nothing but lies, the first thing I always ask was, well, you tell me what those lies are. And so I wrote back to him, what are the lies? What were the lies? I just said his name and what were the lies. His real first name, by the way, is Allen, Allen. So Allen, what were the lies? And this was his response. When she said I went to the room at 1 a.m, she had called me to come. She found the box too. When I get there, they hand me the box on the porch to say, take it back. We don't want him in no trouble. 3, I haven't got the box on the porch, and showed her what was in it. Forward, the box was in it. I'm just reading what he wrote. I can't help that he doesn't write good English. She found was Chris's box, not the 80s box. The box I was looking for was a gun ammo box, like an army-style big box. There was no money in it. Has some seeds and some weed and a little bit of box when it like $20 boxes you get at Walmart. And I passed my polygraph. Bad eggs. That's the nickname for a main suspect and their disappearance. Bad eggs. My polygraph, bad eggs from conclusive. If you ask me, Mike filtered and Sammy Davis and were in on it, covering something up because they got drugs from bad eggs too. And why was my name and last name put out to be a thug or troublemaker? I've never been in enough trouble in that at that time. Never that started a landslide that got me into trouble. I went looking for Chris and Christina with his dad Bill, even give him some money to help him because I work on the turbo making $100,000 a year. I had no reason to lie about everything. I'm just, once again, if you're saying Ed can't suddenly speak English, I'm just reading what he wrote. So you can probably have to listen to this a few times to try to decipher it. My response, Rusty, I've seen your criminal record. Forgery, burglary, credit card fraud, narcotics, etc., etc., etc. Some of it in that 2006/2007 range. People who make $100,000 a year don't do that stuff. Come on, man. That was my response to him. His response to me was, let me do something here very quickly. Okay, and he says, you want to bet on that? I worked for ACBL Barge Lines, and I took charges in the last part of 2006 for someone else. After the whole thing about Chris and Christina happened, get the facts straight. You all slandered my name, and that's why I moved from Savannah. And also, it was in a stump, and he had a video of the 3 people who stole it. Chris and Christina, and also Timothy Mittendorf. And also, Mrs. Flatt told people she was going to kill me. That's why I stopped going by there, but I did go by Bill's house. Chris' dad, till he moved off. I have no idea what happened to them, and if I did, I would have told it to the FBI when they questioned me. I hate people who talk down on me and my name. I think I should have been notified before it and aired by legal rights. And my response to him was, Rusty, I've said all I have to say. Good luck to you, and please stop breaking the law. He never did respond to me. I've not heard from a lawyer. I don't think that Cheryl, Christopher's mother, has heard from a lawyer, and frankly, nothing that we did in that interview was slanderous or libelous or hurt. First of all, I don't know if I've talked about this for a while, but we try to stay away from slander and libel, as you would probably understand on this program. It's one of the reasons we don't do theories, because that's how you quickly can end up, getting in trouble when you start saying, for example, this is just an example. This is not the truth. This is just an example. If we would have come out and said, oh yeah, Rusty killed Chris and Christina. We didn't do that. I'm not saying that I haven't thought that. I'm not saying that Cheryl hasn't thought that. I haven't said, maybe other people have thought that, but we surely didn't say that on the program. I think with Chris and Christina's disappearances, I think it's reasonable to believe that somebody killed them. I don't like saying that, but I think it's reasonable to. Maybe they just ran off and moved to California or something. And if they're still alive, and if that's the case, it's better than them being deceased. But we don't theorize, we don't do conjecture, things like that on the program, during these interviews. And in talking to Cheryl about what Rusty wrote, of course, what she said, as you would expect it, she says that's all lies. We didn't call him or anything else. He just appeared. So, now having said that, you should all know that after that episode came out, there were people who were suspicious of Christopher's brother, who has a criminal record, was at least having problems at the time, and I'm not saying those people are wrong. But there was nothing that we did in the interview that slandered Rusty. One of the standards for slander is that it has to damage a person's reputation. Well, looking at Rusty's criminal record, it would be hard to do that. And then, of course, the person filing the slander suit has to prove how he or she was damaged monetarily. Just can't say, well, you hurt my feelings. It's a lot more complicated than that in the United States. Other countries, the slander laws, I think, are a little more loose, but not here in the United States. And, of course, the reason for that is because in the United States, we look at speech a little bit different than they do in most other countries. Most other countries do not have freedom of speech. So I can understand Rusty doesn't like being talked about, but he was there. He doesn't deny that he was there that night. He doesn't deny getting that box. So I think his expectation should be that if we're going to talk about Chris and Christina's disappearance, then we have to talk about that. That he would think that we would talk about Chris and Christina's disappearance without mentioning that, well, he's just not very smart. The next disappearance I want to talk about is Jacob Paddock-Weeks. I'm very happy to say that a search was done. I'm not sure a ton of people showed up for it, but I do want to thank a listener of Unfound who worked with Jacob's family to make it happen. I did talk to Jacob's father about it after it happened. I did talk to this listener after it happened, and both of them kind of said the same thing, is this area is very, very difficult to search. It would be difficult to search even if you had 100 people. Given the terrain, given the forest and the multiple directions that Jacob could have gone and ran off, if we're to believe that he was in the truck when it wrecked. And I personally believe that he was. Maybe some people still don't think that, and that's fine, but I believe that he was in the truck, that he wrecked it, and he was the one who ran off. But my understanding is that a hat was found that could be Jacob's during the search. And so that's, I guess, something positive. And they had to do this. I think this search was done right before the snow started. And so they really didn't have a chance to do a search and then go back like a month later and do another one. I'm hoping that they have some searches planned, or at least one search planned for 2021. I think that would be the smart thing to do. And of course, in that area of Colorado, you're probably gonna have to wait till April or May to make sure that the weather will be to their liking. Because in this area, it starts snowing very early, and it snows very early in the fall, and it snows far into the spring. So we have to keep that in mind. This is not like, for example, Las Vegas, where a search could be done any time of the year, or even a place here like Florida, where a search could be done, I guess, anytime. So the other part that came out of this is that one of the big questions in Jacob's disappearance, well, where was he coming from and where was he going that day? And that was a big question mark during the interview that I did with his father and Jacob's stepmother. That information has been attained. They've found out where he was going and where he was coming from. But I have to be honest, I don't know what those locations are. I've just been told that they now know that. And I think that's important. I don't know how much it's adding to the overall picture of his disappearance. But anytime you have a question like that, if somebody does disappear while driving on a road somewhere, and what is that person, man or woman, doing that in that area, I think the next question you have to start asking is, where was this person and where do we think this person was going? And that was unknown at the time that we covered Jacob's disappearance. It's good that it is known now, and that can be added to all the other information that his family has regarding his disappearance. I'm hopeful in 2021 that at least another search can be done in that area. Of course, maybe in a different location, and maybe more items can be found. I know that it's very difficult for a family to get involved in something like that because they think, well, if this search is successful, we might find Jacob's remains right there on the ground, out in the forest somewhere, and that could be very traumatic. Of course, very traumatic if it's his father, stepmother, Jacob's mother, a very close family member that would happen upon that. I can't imagine. I just can't even imagine something like that happening. But on the other hand, that's why they're out there. That's why searchers are done. What do I think happened? I have to admit that this goes back to what I just talked about, people walking off, running off out of their lives. There's nothing that I've heard to believe anything other than that Jacob did go off into those mountains, those woods around that very treacherous area of Colorado, and something happened. That's what I personally believe. That's my theory. It could be totally something else. I don't know if there's facts to support that. I don't know if there's facts to support any other scenario. But that's the theory that's foremost in my thought several months after covering his disappearance on Unfound. Either way, whether they agree with me or not, I think more complete searches do have to be done in the area, just to, if nothing else, rule that scenario out. Next disappearance will be Joseph Bain, spelled Boehm. Every time I see that name, I know mentally I pronounce it wrong. But then I remind myself, no, it is not pronounced how it looks. Little Joe Bain. If you will remember, this was a disappearance in which Joe was at this house with his friend's girlfriend, and the mother. And their story was that Joe got a phone call, and he left the house, and as he was going out, this girlfriend was on the porch, and he said to her, don't wait up, something like that. He was gone. I think in covering the disappearance and interviewing Joe's sister, I think that we called into question at least some of those facts, some things that maybe don't seem to make sense. In addition, she did get to speak to Cooley, the friend, and his girlfriend, and the mother this year. And the recollections of that night differ from what they had been saying, what the sister had been thinking all of these years regarding Joe's disappearance. So it's like, well, are you telling the truth then, or are they telling the truth now? Are they just misremembering things honestly, or are they trying to change their stories? It's just a little unclear. But what has happened is that Joe's sister did get access to this house and took some pictures. She sent them to me. She took a picture of a spot on the floor that she thought was very curious looking. I'm not sure what to think of it. It's like it looks like it's like a wood floor, and the way I would explain it, it looks like it had water damage. So the wood doesn't look nice and shiny. It's very dull and dark, if not black. And we couldn't help but talk about, could this have been a mark from that night, going way back 18 years, that something happened, and then the rest of the people in that house tried to clear it up. I'm open to that. I don't know if seeing that mark makes me think that or not, but I'm certainly open to the concept. Just not sure about that. But she continues to work very hard on this, and I give her a lot of credit. But you should also know, and unfortunately at this point I cannot get into the specifics, but just recently she heard what seems to be a contradictory theory as to Joe going missing and where he actually went missing from. I'm not sure what to make of it at this point. It's certainly something worth looking into, that actually he was somewhere else when he disappeared and not at the house where he was living with his friend and the other people. So that's something that I think she will be looking into in 2021. And being that it came up in the episode, I can also tell you that she continues to look at this Mexico angle. Those were pictures that I posted back at the time of this guy that maybe kind of sort of like looks like Joe. She's continuing to look into that, doing some good work there to trying to rule this homeless person in Mexico in, or rule this homeless person in Mexico out. The next disappearance I want to talk about is Vanessa Orenz. After we covered Vanessa's disappearance, of course, her sister Tinker was on. You'll remember there was Pete Petrie, who is a suspect in Vanessa's disappearance. Of course, they were a couple, and Pete said that she went off with some guys, and of course, that's never been proven. It seems to go along with a lot of these kinds of disappearances, mentioning Marion Hurley, Angela Green, Rosemary Rapp, etc. But his son, after the episode came out, was put in jail for something, and there might have been the idea out there that this could have something to do with Vanessa's disappearance. And because I have to admit, I think Tinker believes that Pete was involved, but also his son was involved. But it turns out now that Pete's son, Ira, I-R-A, is now back out of jail. He was in jail for a while, and now he is back out. Not sure what's going on there. But that was something that was noteworthy since we covered that disappearance earlier this year in 2020. I think that was during the summer that we covered Vanessa's disappearance. Seems like yesterday. But it was surely during the summer of 2020. But so I don't know if there's any information out there about Ira being in jail and being let out, but this is what Tinker told me. And Pete is still on that piece of land, and that's the update I have for Vanessa's disappearance. The next update, and this is something that is happening right as I am recording this program that will be coming out on Christmas Day, 2020, December 25th, 2020. It just happened to be a Friday. Just within the last, 10 days, remains were found in the area where Robbie Hurt's truck was found. If you remember, just to go through the facts, very general terms, Robbie's at home with his wife and kids. She discovers he's using drugs again. He takes off. He allegedly ends up at this friend of his. Robbie overdoses. This friend brings him back to life using Narcan. This friend says that then Robbie jumped in his truck and took off. And then Robbie's truck is found a mile and a half away from this friend's house, and Robbie is never seen again. I've said that I'm certainly open to the idea that maybe this whole Narcan story did not happen. Maybe Robbie just overdosed and nobody brought him back to life. I'm open to that. I'm open to a couple different scenarios. Whereas I have to admit that more people than I thought did think that Robbie really did leave that place and dump his car and run off. So it was more than I expected. The audience never ceases to surprise me. But now I think in the Danville area, that Danville Express Way area, if you were to look on a map, very close to the Virginia-North Carolina border. And there is a big manufacturing plant right near there as well, if you look on a map. In that area, within a mile of where Robbie's truck was discovered, once again, shortly after he disappeared, remains have been found. As of the recording of this episode, and I'm doing this particular part of it on December 20th, I'm actually recording this over a couple days, the remains have not been identified. From what it said was the remains were spread out. So it seems that, I guess you could interpret that as if these are human remains, that animals got a hold of some of the bones and took them away. That the remains were not all found together. What does that mean? Of course, they could still do DNA. I mean, that's no big deal. But if the remains are all spread out, then it's going to be very, very difficult trying to figure out how this person died, whether it's Robbie or not. I think it makes sense to believe that it's Robbie, given the location and so near to his truck, but we just don't know. There are many other people who have gone missing in the Virginia, North Carolina area. Who knows where they end up? And so we just don't know at this point. But I can assure you that once it is determined if this was Robbie or not, and we know how DNA can take a long time to be done, we go back to Austin Pevo's remains, Andrea Bowman's remains, where it was pretty obvious who those remains were, especially in Andrea's case. It still took like 6-7 months in those two different states, Michigan and Idaho. So unless they can identify these remains by some other method, then it's going to be a while. I think we're going to be well into 2021 before we find out. Once again, unless dental records can be done, or there's something like Robbie had a pin put in his leg if he ever broke his leg or something like that. Other than that, we're going to have to wait for the DNA, and it could be a while. So I just want to prepare you for that. But remains have been found in the area. My assistant Cherie was the one who first saw the news, and then it got posted in the discussion group on Facebook, so all of you could read what we're reading. Okay, the next disappearance I want to talk about, and this one contains a very long email that I received, and then I will read you the email, and then I will read you my response. This email comes from Doug Jones's wife's, at the time, Jo Ellen, her brother-in-law. So this guy who sent me this message is Jo Ellen's sister's husband, and I'm not going to mention his name. I know what his name is, but I'm not going to mention it. I'm just going to read the message that he sent to me. And when did he send this to me? Let me look that up. Let me give you the date on that. This was October 8th of 2020. So a few weeks after we covered Doug's disappearance. If you remember, Doug and his wife and their kids were planning on going to Disney World the next day. He went out to do a job, never came home, and his truck was found within like a mile of where he lived. I also think that if you read between the lines in my interview with Hal, Doug's brother, that he believes that Doug's wife, Jo Ellen, at the time, had something to do with his disappearance. One of the main factors being that she decided to go to Disney anyway, even though her husband was missing. The next day, she decided to go. Maybe that rings a bell. But I got this email from Jo Ellen's brother-in-law, so Jo Ellen's sister's husband. And I will read it. I'm not going to give you his name, but then I will read my response to him. So this guy says, I'm writing to clear up at least one point of confusion relating to your podcast on Douglas Carl Jones. But first, let me introduce myself to avoid any more confusion. I've been married to Jo Ellen's sister for 37 years. I'm otherwise unrelated to Doug's family. I've been acquainted with Jo Ellen since the first grade when the Harmons first moved to Malden. We were in the same graduating class when I joined the Boy Scouts. Her father was my scoutmaster. It was in Scouts that I became friends with her brother Carlton, who was a grade ahead of us. It is because of Carlton that I write. Carlton did not die from suicide. In fact, I think I mentioned, I didn't read this whole letter at the time, but I think that back in an Unfound Live, or even I think what I did was I passed this along to Hal, that this guy is saying that Carlton did not die from a suicide, which is something that we discussed in that episode. Carlton did not die from a suicide. He was living in Columbia, South Carolina, working for Metropolitan Refining, servicing industrial chilled water systems. He was liked and respected by his employer and clients, and he was a very good uncle to my kids. When he didn't show up to a client at the regular time, they contacted his boss, who went to check on him. They found him dead on the bathroom floor, and it was evident he had just taken a shower before he collapsed. The autopsy showed he bled to death from an ulcer. Unknown to everyone at the time, he was being treated for diabetes. I guess he was keeping this a secret. He was not one to complain about ailments. I'm sure he was feeling lousy before he died, but was determined to go to work anyway. That is how dedicated and reliable he was. His story needs to be told correctly, and so that's why I'm now reading this to all of you on a regular episode so all of you can hear it, and we're correcting the record on that. As for the rest of Hal's story, of course, Hal being Doug's brother, who was the guest for the episode, there are some incongruities with my recollection, but these are not really relevant to the case. Hal engaged, once again, the guest for the episode, Hal engaged in a lot of insinuation, conjecture, and hearsay, but I don't think he was trying to be malicious. Your summary at the end of the broadcast was well done and should have reminded the listeners there's more to the personal side of this story. As you have spoken to April, you know some of the problems in the family. When you wade into these things, you are dealing with real people with real hurts, often self-inflicted when they can't see it. April is Jo Ellen, one of Jo Ellen and Doug's daughters, but she does not go by that name now. I wish you success with your podcast. If you are interested, Jo Ellen wants to speak to you. I'm not sure it's in her best interest, but if you want to talk to her, she's asked me to give you her phone number. Best regards. So I got back to him. That was on October 8th at 9:45 a.m. I responded an hour later, October 8th at 10:48 a.m. This was my response. Thank you for contacting me. Allow me to respond to each of these topics in order. Carlton, thank you for clarifying that. I apologize that we got that wrong. I'm not sure us talking about Carlton, even as a suicide, affected the listeners' opinions on what happened to Doug. Granted, if we knew what happened, we could just go solve Doug's disappearance right now. However, how Carlton and his death could relate to Doug's disappearance has always been a very thin thread at best. On the other hand, there have been brothers who have helped their sisters commit murder. But I don't think the facts point that way no matter how he died. You have my sympathies. And I will respond to his email and some of the other things, but here is the rest of my response to him. Hal, like 95% of my guests, was very gung-ho about a certain scenario from the first time I spoke to him. This is not a criticism. That is a fact of life in the work I do. Yet, as you saw, we don't discuss theories on episodes, and I don't allow guests to quote-unquote go after certain people. However, there's only so much I can do, and oftentimes the guest's beliefs can be read/heard between the lines. Yes, I did speak to April, also known as Ducky, about Doug's disappearance. I think Ducky continues to be open-minded regarding Doug's disappearance, but Ducky did indicate that Joe Ellen never said anything that led Ducky to believe Joe Ellen is responsible for Doug's disappearance, despite the problems Ducky and Joe Ellen seem to have years later. So Ducky did not allow personal feelings regarding Joe Ellen to get in the way of being objective regarding Doug's disappearance. Ducky, once again, is Joe Ellen and Doug's daughter, and that's the name she goes by now. As for my opinion, I wrote on my private blog on Patreon that due to Joe Ellen going to Disney, there are always going to be suspicions regarding her. That is just something she is going to have to live with. It does not make her guilty. But people judge actions, and Joe Ellen's actions that morning are some of the most unusual I've encountered in almost 200 disappearances, no matter if Doug had gone away and come back before or not. Having said all that, I'm on the record on my blog stating that I think Doug went somewhere between the store and the church. I think he was flashing that cash around that he had gotten, as he had done before. Hal admitted that, and a guy or guys killed him for it. Then they dumped the truck near Doug's house to make it look like Doug ran off. I reject the idea that Joe Ellen had anything to do with the disappearance, because neighbors would have seen Doug's truck in their driveway if he went home that evening. And I should have included because they don't have a garage. All their vehicles would have been sitting outside. Yet there are no facts dispelling the idea that Doug ran off and decided to stay gone this time. I should also state that a large majority of the listeners reject Joe Ellen being involved as well. I'm not saying some don't, but the way I remember it going back to October is that I think a large majority of you rejected the idea that she had anything to do with it. As for talking to Joe Ellen, I suppose I could talk to her, but I would have to ask her detailed questions about everything, because she still must be considered a person of interest until Doug's disappearance is solved. And all of it would be recorded and on the record. Thanks for contacting me. I wrote that, as you heard. I got that first email at 9:45 a.m. on October 8th, 2020. I responded an hour later, and I've not heard from this guy since. So that's October 8th. Today is December 20th, so that's 2.5 months later. He never responded, even though he said that Joe Ellen was willing to speak to me. You can judge that for yourself. You heard what I had to say, and this is how I handle all of this. This is, I'm not picking on Joe Ellen or anybody in particular. This is how I always handle these things. If somebody says, well, this person wants to talk to you, okay, well, it's going to be on the record, and I'll record it, and I'll ask the questions, and we'll see what happens. And, hey, Steve Pankey went for that. So it can't be that unusual to make that request. So... But this person never got back to me. Why? I don't know. I mean, he was the one who offered up that Joe Ellen was willing to talk to me, and then I said, yeah, I'll be happy to do that. Then there's no response. You can judge that for what it is. As far as, bringing up something that he stated in here, let me just read that again. As for the rest of Hal's story, there's some incongruities with my recollection, but these are not really relevant to the case. Hal engaged in a lot of insinuation, conjecture, and hearsay. I have to say I don't agree with that. Maybe there was a bit of insinuation, and I will even admit that during the interview, I think that you could read between the lines regarding Hal's attitude toward Joe Ellen. I think you could certainly tell that, no matter how well I try to be, how hard I try to work to keep that stuff out of it. There's only so much you can do. But I would not say there was a lot of insinuation, conjecture in here. I totally reject that. So I just don't know. The guy sounds like a nice guy. I think that he's trying to do what he thinks is right. I can't help but think that maybe his own wife, who is Joanne Silsner, kind of, might have made him do it. I don't know. But these are things that come to mind. And I have to admit that I don't like it when somebody sends me a long email and then they say at the end, well, Joe Ellen's willing to speak to you. And then I take the time to write that long email back and respond to each of the topics that he brought up, and then he never responds to me. I think that's rude. So I just don't know. I'm not saying it makes me change my mind to think that Joe Ellen did have something to do with it, but if you're going to offer up that she's willing to talk, and then I say, yeah, let's do it, and then you don't respond, and then I'm just going to put it out there for all of you to judge. Because there's anybody should have an understanding, except for guests. Anybody who emails me, listeners, police officers, anybody else, there is a possibility that your email might be read on the air. As far as guests, they know that their privacy is always solid with me. They can send me anything, and I will not air it. Everybody else, it becomes, as soon as you hit that send button, it becomes public if I want to read it. Just remember that. So, I'd love to talk to Joe Ellen. But being that it's been 2.5 months since these emails happened, I guess that's not going to. Maybe she got afraid of the recorded angle. Well, you have nothing to hide, then there's nothing wrong. There's nothing to worry about being recorded on. If everything, in addition, it's not like I can force her to answer questions. She can always say, I don't know, I'm not going to answer that. And she, this isn't North Korea. I can't torture her into answering these questions. So, still like to talk to her. But I don't think that that's going to happen. I just wonder how things switch so fast from, yeah, I'll give you her number, to not responding to me at all. But that's my update for the disappearance of Doug Jones. You're going to continue to come up with your own theories regarding it. Next update, and we are almost to the end of the list. If you're going along and looking at Unfound's, disappearance, we're getting very close to the present here of December 2020. I need to talk about Bradley Brooks, and like Robbie Hurt's update, this is very, very, very brand new information. Just within the last couple days, remains have been found on Flower Bluff, and that's that area. It's a Corpus Christi, Texas address, but this particular area where Brad was living at the time, where his car was found, is called Flower Bluff. Flour, not flour like the plant, flour like what you bake with, Flour, Bluff, Flower Bluff. And Cherie was the one who sent the article to me, and I read it. I posted it in the group for all of you to see. And these remains, there's no denying it, were found very close to where Brad's car was. I think the big issue is that the car was on the far side of this plant that is in the area, this water treatment plant or something like that, was to the north of this plant, and where the remains were found were to the south of that plant. And unless Brad walked the whole way around to get to that, that's the only way you could have done that. You cannot walk along the water to do that because this plant is there. It's all fenced off or whatever. So, I've not talked to Misty, Brad's sister, yet, but I have had quite a few back and forths with Brad's girlfriend at the time, Ashley. I cannot go into those discussions because they are private. But I think we have to remember some things. It, of course, makes a lot of sense that these remains are Brad's. And you should know the way they were discovered is a guy just walking his dog, walking in this area. It's like in a field. And once again, if you look at a satellite view and if you see this plant, it's at the far east side of Webb Street, just south of that, in these bushes. And a guy was walking his dog and came upon those remains. Now, I would urge you to remind you of something. Then this even came up during my interview with both Ashley and Misty when we covered Bradley's disappearance. Many homeless live in that area. That was something that was talked about then. And even Ashley said when she found out about this, she was down there in the general area of where these remains were found, and there were abandoned homeless encampments in the area. So we have to keep that in mind. I know it seems like it makes a lot of sense that this would be Brad, but it seems to me at this point that Misty and Ashley aren't so sure. And that's all I can say. Like I said, I haven't talked to Misty, but I've talked to Ashley. We've had very in-depth discussion about it, and that's all I can say. But it sounds to me like they're not totally convinced for some reasons that I can't go into. Not right now. This may be another situation. It does sound to me, though, in this situation that the remains were all together, unlike Robbie's, where I read that they were kind of spread out. So either way, if the only way to identify these remains is with DNA, once again, we could be well into 2021 before we know. And if you were to go to look at a satellite image, you're going to see that where these remains were, it's like kind of the same distance from where the remains were found to the car to about the same distance from the remains to where Ashley and Brad were living at the time. And so once again, this will, I think, is going to cause a lot of people to think they are Bradley's remains, and I realize that makes a lot of sense. What I'm telling you is that at this point, Ashley and Misty aren't so sure. And maybe I should just say this. Ashley being, I haven't talked to Misty. I should just say in talking to Ashley, she isn't so sure for specific reasons, let's just call it scientific reasons, that I just can't go into at this time due to she gave me no permission to talk about it. So I'll just leave it at that. But once again, another breaking news just within the last few days. I think that in writing about Bradley's disappearance on Patreon just within the last 6 weeks, I think I expressed the idea that, very open to the idea that it was foul play for a variety of reasons. We have to remember not only did Bradley disappear, but this battery charger, the hood is up on the car. And we have to remember, even if these remains end up being Bradley, if they do, that doesn't mean that there wasn't foul play. Somebody could have committed foul play and just dumped them right there in those bushes. So just because, even if these remains are determined to be Bradley's, doesn't mean that he walked off and overdosed or anything else. It very well could be that it was foul play. The good news, once again, though, is it's a very new disappearance. And it seems like the remains are all intact, which makes it at least a little more probable that they can determine a cause of death. We just have to hope. If it is Bradley. Of course, if it's somebody else, and I have gone to NamUs and looked up any missing people in the Corpus Christi area, it would be hard to connect any of them to that area, at least from the information you can glean from NamUs. So that maybe does make it more likely it's Bradley, but one way or the other, I am hoping they can identify those remains and determine a cause of death, whether it's Brad or not. I want you to know that. Finally, this is the last update that will be included in this episode. I want to talk about Jody Huisentruit. I have to once again tell you how excited I was to finally include Jody's disappearance in the catalog of disappearances that Unfound has covered. It's one that I've known about for over 20 years. I've taken a great interest in it. When findsjody.com started way back, 15 years ago, 17 years ago or something, I was one of the first persons to sign up for the forum there. And I've continued to watch this case very closely, well before Unfound ever got started. So to cover it in depth, like I did with Caroline Lowe. Felt very good about that. And Caroline, I've known her for a few years now, since 2016, so it was good to talk to her again in official capacity on the record, and we could really get into all of the technical details of Jodi's disappearance, everything that's been done over the last 25 years. Now, the update is that even just since covering Jodi's disappearance just a couple months ago, there is an update that on findjodi.com you'll find that it seems somebody or some people are maybe thinking that Jodi's disappearance could be connected to the murder of Michelle Martinko, who was murdered, just outright murdered, stabbed in a parking lot in 1979, not in Mason City, but in Cedar Rapids. And the thinking is because Michelle and Jodi, I guess, kind of look alike. And both of them, well, of course, Michelle was murdered. Her body was left behind, but attacked as she was going to her car. Of course, Jodi was attacked and dragged away as she was approaching her car. And at one time, Jodi did do reporting work in the Cedar Rapids area. But at the time, as you know, she was a reporter working out of Mason City at the time of her disappearance. So because of that, they're looking into that, because there is a guy who was eventually connected to Michelle Martinko's murder, and his name is Jerry Burns, and he was connected to her murder years later through DNA. And if you go to findjodi.com, you can read more about the work that is now being done concerning this particular angle. I will give you my opinion that it seems pretty thin. We have to remember that Jodi disappeared in 1995. Michelle was murdered in 1979, so 16 years difference. I don't know. Can Jerry Burns be connected to any other murders through DNA, or any other women who went missing, who knew him? These are all avenues that are going to have to be looked into. But I could tell you at this point, it just seems a little thin. Not totally non-existent, but let's say hanging on by a hair. But, it seems to me, you heard the interview yourself, that you can only look into John Van Cise for so long. The police have been trying to pin it on him for all this time, and it doesn't sound to me like they're any closer to doing so. We know of other people who were mentioned in that episode that they've tried to attach it to, and they've been working on those angles for a long time. And none of that has happened either. So maybe it's time to look at a Jerry Burns type of character. And any other murders that could even remotely be connected, not just, Mason City, maybe in the surrounding area. I continue to believe that Jodi was disappeared and murdered by some sort of stalker, somebody whose name that has maybe this person has come up in police investigations over the last 25 years, but the person has been dismissed, and this person's name has never made it to the public. I'm certainly open to that, and that happens often. That there's an investigation done. There's a list of suspects. The police look at John Smith. He's, for the most part, they can't totally rule him out, but they don't have enough evidence to really connect him, and then they move on to looking at other suspects, and maybe these other suspects, get out, their names get out into the public, and so the public really concentrates on them. Then years later, the police go back to that John Smith character, and it actually ends up being him, even though they kind of dismissed him originally. So I'm open to that in Jodi's disappearance, that it could be somebody that the police have looked at one time, and they just dismissed for this reason or that reason. Just using what I think I know, I realize that I do get some of these disappearances wrong, usually because there's just no way you could have ever expected. For example, Esther Westenbarger. I don't know how anybody could have suspected that she drove into that retention pond. Of course, that was one that I got wrong. And with Jody's, being that they've looked at so many different suspects for so long, this was not a perfect crime. This was a crime that was committed, it seems, not spur of the moment, but very recklessly, in that it took place out in a parking lot where other people could have seen. I'm not saying anybody did, but could have, and could have heard. Somebody else could have been out the parking lot at the time. All of these items strewn over the parking lot. Who's to say that Jody couldn't have fought the attacker off and got away? It was a very risky plan that this person had. And this, to me, speaks to some sort of obsession, which once again goes to a stalker. John Van Cise, for all his imperfections, was not stalking Jody. She was choosing to be with him and being seen with him and doing fun things with him. There's no sign to me that he was obsessed with her, because once again, she was choosing to be with him, and it sounds like he was choosing to be with a lot of young women. Good for him. That's why I continue to dismiss him, and I think he's also just a little bit of a strange guy, which isn't immoral, illegal, or unethical. But that's the new angle. They're looking at Jerry Burns as a possibility for Jody's disappearance. Sounds thin to me, but I'm not the one looking into it. And with that concludes the list of updates for this 7th update episode. Well, I thought I was done with updates for this episode that is airing the last Friday of December 2020. And I had recorded all of that over the days, roughly December 18th through 20th through the 21st. And then two, of course, huge pieces of news that have already been mentioned in this episode in the news section happened. And so I'm going to talk about those two right now. So I'm going a little out of order. Of course, Jennifer Wilkerson's disappearance. We covered it in the summer of 2017, so it should have been well back in the line there. Of course, Uniques we've just covered within the last 2 months. She would have been much more recently. That would have been in the line because, as I said, I go from the beginning right up to the present in order, but I just found it easier to put these two in that line right at the end instead of going back through there and splicing these updates in. Regarding Jennifer Wilkerson, I want you to know that Vicki Wilkerson, one of my favorite guests on the program. I've said many times that I keep in contact with most of the guests who have been on the program. That doesn't mean every day. That doesn't mean every week. It may not mean every month. But many of them I do follow on Facebook. They follow me. They're in the discussion group. I have all of their emails. I, of course, have all of their phone numbers. But I would say that when it comes to Vicki Wilkerson, she is one of those guests who I've talked to the most since she was on the program. Probably number one, she knows who she is. Probably Joyce Rivatuzo is probably the guest I've talked to the most since she was on the program way back in 2017. But Vicki Wilkerson was probably well up there, definitely in the top 5. And I just enjoyed her so much. And when I found out that she passed away on December 20th, 2020, it hit me very hard. And I'm recording this on December 22nd, and it still feels very bad. She was a very good person. I enjoyed talking to her. We had a lot of discussions that really sometimes had nothing to do with her daughter's disappearance. And it was a pleasure to get to know her that way, and I'm very sorry that I did not get to meet her ever in person. I think that would have been a great experience for me. She unfortunately joins the list of other guests who have died, those being Jessica Curtis, Donna Jean Kapp, and Janice Norwood. To my knowledge, these are the only 4 guests who have passed away. If I am missing a guest for some reason, I've lost someone in the shuffle who has passed away since they've been on the program. Please let me know. I feel bad if I've missed somebody. I try to keep up on all of this, but the closer we get to 200 disappearances, as you would imagine, it's harder to keep track of everybody. But those are the 4 who I know who have passed, and in every one of those situations, I should say, I'm sorry that I didn't get to meet any of them in person. And you always put that on your list. I would like to get out on the road one of these days, and it is in the plans to go around the United States and go to all of these different cities and counties, locations where these disappearances occurred. That is on the agenda for someone or down the road. I'm not going to say it's going to happen in 2021, but it is on my long-term agenda. And that these people passed before I could do that hurts. It just hurts. Regarding, and you should know that Vicky knew the angle. We did some things this past year regarding her daughter's disappearance, and she knew what we were working on. And I think that I've kind of kept it under wraps, but I think that I can now state it, although I still will not name any names, of what, once again, 2020 got in the way of so many things that could have been done this year for a lot of different reasons. But something that is surely on the agenda for 2021 now, especially with Vicky's passing, is that, and I'm going to say this again, I'm going to reveal this now. What we discovered regarding Jennifer's disappearance, and she disappeared 16 years ago. But this was just something that was happened upon within the last year and a half, is that the first investigator on her disappearance knew Jennifer and never revealed that during his work on her disappearance. And the way they knew each other was that they both worked at a concert venue in Lubbock, Texas. She worked in ticketing, and he worked, when he wasn't a police officer, in security for that concert venue, which is very common for police officers to pick up extra work doing work like that. That is not unusual. But they surely knew each other. It's not that big of a venue. It's not some 50,000 seat or 65,000 seat or 100,000 seat arena, something like that. It's a very small concert venue in Lubbock in which they both work there, and it is very easy to believe that they did know each other. And you also have to remember that Jennifer, before she disappeared, she talked about having a connection in law enforcement. Once again, you go back and listen to my interview with Vicky from 2017, you will hear that. And Jennifer had mentioned that to different people. And now, this time later, 3.5 years later, we're thinking that the connection she had was this guy that she knew by working at the concert venue. I think that makes a lot of sense. And like I said, at no time, he is not responsible for her disappearance now. That's no surprise, 16 years later. But he never mentioned that, never revealed it. And we've found out that he never mentioned that to his superiors in the Lubbock Police Department either. And that's a problem. I'm not going to say that he's responsible for disappearance, but he is on my agenda for sure now in 2021. I know who he is. I think I have his phone number. Now that's been pushed up to a number one priority regarding Jennifer's disappearance. And once again, a lot of things in 2020 got in the way of us pushing forward on this. So, that's the update for Jennifer Wilkerson. Very sorry. Her family, Vicky's family, has my deepest condolences. If they are hearing this, I want them to know that Vicky quickly became one of my most favorite people that I ever had on the program, whether it was a phone call or the several email messages we exchanged back and forth, and were very special to me. And I just wish that, I hadn't talked to her for a while before her passing on December 20th, and I feel very bad about that. But I want all of them to know that Vicky was a very special person, even affecting people like myself who never got to meet her. And I hope that Vicky rests in peace. And if we are to believe that Jennifer is no longer with us on this earth, I hope that she and Vicky are now together. All right, the other update is for Unique Harris. And once again, this is something that happened just within the last 4 days. Recording this this entire episode between like December 20th and December 23rd of 2020. There have been charges made in Unique's disappearance against a guy's name is Isaac Moye, Moye. He's been charged with second-degree murder. And if you'd like to see what I think is a very good article regarding all of this, all of the recent developments in this case, I urge you to go to the Washington Post's website, and they have a very detailed article about the reasons that Isaac has been charged. Now, you should know, and you can read it for yourself. I'm going to go over some of the most important points regarding this, and then I'll have some comments afterwards. And then I'll also talk about my interview that I did with Valencia a couple months ago, not even 2 months ago, I don't think, regarding Unique's disappearance and how this all comes together. I'll kind of do a little compare and contrast, I guess you might say. What came out in this article is that it seems that the children did not sleep through that entire night. In fact, one of the children at some point in the last 10 years had told investigators that when he opened the door from the bedroom out into the main room of this apartment, he saw Isaac, who he knew as the nickname Iceberg. But it seems this child changed his story later. In addition, something that you will see in the article is that a section had been cut from the couch in Unique's apartment, as if somebody was trying to make forensics evidence, DNA, something like that, disappear. The article says that whoever did that was not totally successful in making all of the forensics disappear. And then the other point was that at the time that this all happened, and in charging Isaac, that he actually was wearing some sort of GPS ankle bracelet because he was on house arrest for another crime he had committed, I guess, earlier that year, and was on bail or bond, I don't know, but he had, for some reason, had this ankle bracelet on and at the time, and it put the pinging of it put him in the vicinity of Unique's apartment on the night that she disappeared. These are just some of the points that came out in the article. Now, you probably remember none of those points came out in my interview with Valencia. I have to admit I'm a little disappointed by that, but I think it's a combination of a couple things. First of all, I'm not sure how much Valencia knew of those things that because none of that came out. Isaac Moye's name is a new name to me. I've never heard it before. I do not believe that Valencia and all the discussions I had with her, including the official interview, ever mentioned his name. But I will say, on the other hand, that Valencia surely noticed that a section had been cut from Unique's couch, because Valencia was one of the people that went over to her apartment the day after Unique disappeared, and she surely saw that section had been taken out. That never came out. Now, I'm guessing that over the last 10 years, Valencia has been under strict orders from the police to keep some details to herself. And I want you to know there's not much that I, as an interviewer, can do about that. But I can tell you honestly that none of those points I just mentioned, that this one of the children there saw Iceberg or Isaac there that night, that he was wearing this ankle bracelet, that a section had been cut from the couch, that's all news to me, for sure. And it's frustrating, but I can't make my guests say things they don't want to say. And in fact, if you remember with my interview with Valencia, she didn't even want to mention any names. In fact, I would say in 4+ years of doing the program that she was one of the people who was most energetic, most forceful about not wanting to mention any names, certainly in the top 5. So there's only so much I can do about that. But I, of course, still wanted to cover Unique's disappearance. I wanted to try to help her family out any way we could. Now, so there's that. You have to understand that I can only get guests to say what they want to say. And if they want to hold things back, even things back from me, I don't know what I can do about that. And but the most important part is that Isaac has been charged with Unique's disappearance. That doesn't mean that he's guilty or anything, but it's better than nothing. Now, the big question probably, and this has popped up with myself and my assistants in the last 24 hours, is that if this little kid said that he saw Iceberg there, that the ankle bracelet placed Isaac in the area, and that DNA on this couch was traced to him, and I'm sure it's been traced to him for a long time now. Why did it take 10 years to arrest him? I'm not sure we have those answers yet. You can read the article. It says there was like a jail informant where Isaac was. He was talking about a young woman who disappeared. Surely that's not as convincing as the little kid saying he saw Iceberg there, about the couch, about the DNA, about the ankle bracelet. Why did it take 10 years? Because to my knowledge, Unique's remains have not been found. Obviously, if they stumbled across a remain somewhere, that would certainly move everything up. But if Unique's remains have been discovered, that's news to me. So I just don't know why it would take 10 years. That all sounds like pretty compelling evidence. It doesn't sound like the evidence is any different in 2020 than it was in 2010 or 2011, 2012, etc. Why did it take all this time? Maybe we'll find that out eventually. I hope so. I hope it doesn't remain a mystery. Of course, if this goes to a trial, then I guess we would find out some of those points. But I think what I'm also saying here is that it is clear that Unique and Isaac knew each other. I mean, if the little boy or girl, I think it was a little boy, opened the door, looked out, and not only knew Isaac, but knew Isaac's nickname, then surely Unique and Isaac knew each other. I'm not saying they had a relationship or anything, but they definitely knew each other somehow. And why did he end up at Unique's apartment that night? He does have criminal charges of violence against other women. Could it just been that motivation? Or Unique and Isaac did have something going on and things got out of hand that night after the kids went to bed. But they certainly knew each other. And so it was not some unique, random, not to use a pun, it was not some random encounter. It was not some rare occurrence where somebody just walking along went up to her apartment, or she's downstairs and some stranger came across her, just hanging outside getting a breath of fresh air. This is certainly a situation where someone who knew Unique harmed her. Which I don't think is a surprise in this particular disappearance. I think maybe all of us are just surprised who it is. I think that Instead, knowing about this phone call between her and her boyfriend that night, that a lot of attention was on him, even on the interview, even what I wrote in the blog. But when a guest is going to, I don't want to call it withhold information, but that's kind of what happened, then we can't help that the public gets the wrong interpretation about what happened in a disappearance. And this is the exact reason that I urge guests to reveal everything they can, whether the police say to or not. Now, in this search situation, it looks like it's going to work out, but many times it doesn't, where people withhold information for years, a decade, 2 decades, and the disappearance is still unsolved, and they're still withholding information, thinking that the public's going to be able to help. Here's what I can tell you to all future guests on Unfound. If you withhold information, important information, then you can't expect the public to be as helpful as you'd like. That's just the way it is. I know that sucks, but that's just the way it is. So I'm happy somebody's been charged. I don't know where it's going to go from here. We'll see if Unique's remains are found. Maybe, but I think the big question right now is, why did it take 10 years? It's not clear to me right at this moment that I'm recording this episode, but hopefully we'll find out. And I've still not talked to Valencia. I've sent her a message. Still have not talked to her about all of this. And now, if you could please pause whatever you are doing as a sign of respect for all the missing people featured on Unfound, as I read off all of their names. Suzanne Lyle, Jason Jolkowski, Jesse Foster, Rosemarie Gayhart, Ben Padilla, Kelly Rothwell, Joshua Guimond, Donnie Smatlack, Andrea Bowman, Robin Abrams, Regina Marie Boss, Christopher Hyde, Jeff Nichols, Rebecca Gary, James Walker, Teresa Butler, Charlotte Paulus, Lola Catherine Fry, Eric Franks, Jeff Joseph, Donna Mikolenko, Dave Madot, Kent Monroe, and Omar Shearer, Claudia Wells, Peggy and Patty McDaniel, Shannon Turner, Brandy Wells, Klishindra Hall, Ronnie Russell, Esther Westenbarger, Shane Fell, Ashley Eifert, Brandon Williams, Craig Freer, Pamela Golden, Chip Campbell, Amanda DeGuio, the passengers and crew of Flight 370, April Pitzer, Jennifer Wilkerson, Kent Jacobs, Aaron Gilbert, Tammy Leppert, Crystal Morrison, Chris Turner, Linda K. Carroll, Nikki McCown, Helen Diamond, Laura Bible and Ashley Freeman, Lucinda Hewells, Ashley Kohler, Debbie Lowe, Patrick Beavers, Clinton Nelson, Troy Galloway, Patty Action, Danielle Bell, Evelyn Hartley, Dal Phillips, Tyler Stice, Bill Underhill, Patty Taylor, Aaron Barnard, Jeremy Burt, Brian Sullivan, Nikki Wells, Marina Bolter, Mandy Stokes, Greg Brooks, Rebecca Henderson, Dominic Hawley Grisham, Tiffany Daniels, Nicholas Masucci, Donald Irwin, Billy DiSilvestro, Renee Yergain, Mikkel Biggs, Al Copper, J.R. Mullahan, Jamie Bowen, Travis Robertson, Rosemary Rapp, Kristen Modafferi, Zoe Campos, Sean Ginyard, Thomas Brown, Amanda Fravel, Julie Early, Ellen Sloan, Renee Lamanna, Nico Lisi, Leah Peebles, Melissa Hasley, Kimberly Raymer, Stephen Kocher, Bonnie Joseph, Immaculate Basil, Bobby Campbell, Kimberly Norwood, Alyssa Turney, Bobby Tennyson, Dale Kerstetter, Lacey Buenfil, Peggy McGuire, Jansen Brewer and Daniel Braden, Robert Cox, Lucas Degerness, Stephen Adams, Ashley Summers, Bonnie and Jeremy Degus, Judith Empke, Jessica Hamby, Tim Beauchart, Devin Bond, Juanita Nelson, Desiree Ferris, Angie Arnell, Deborah Asbury, Sean Koski, Mary Lands, Devin Brown Busetta, Shanna Boydo, Travis Murrow, Keith Fetter, Layla Faulkner, Megan Lancaster, Kelly Sims, Jack Hemby, Barbara Frame, Dorianne Myers, Austin Pevo, Christine Hamilton, Monica Appleton, Jonathan Estes, Molly Miller and Colt Haynes, Donnie Martin III, Kamisha Hollis, Lisa Wallace, Tammy McKittrick, Julie C., Stephanie Clemens, Andy Chapman, Trevor Nichols, Tiffany Johnson, Tyler North, David Kesey, Lucero Princess Sarabia, Brandy Myers, J.L. Hamblin, Bradley Allen, Timothy Guy, Ronald McNutt, Cameron Remmer, Tammy Arthur and Chad Peters, Jesse Ross, Lisa Shuttleworth, Jackson Miller, Patrick Reed, Jeremy Goodwin, Mary Jane Van Gilder, Phyllis Corbin, Eric Alvarado, Cassandra Ramirez, April Andrews, David Hardy Jr., Dennis J. Lushball, Christy Nichols, Christopher Sanders, Danielle Sleeper, Julie Weflin, Shelva Rafty, Rodney Kaiser, Christina Branham and Christopher Mittendorf, Gregory Howells, Brian Cook, Charles Thompson, Jessica Garino, Jacob Paddock-Weeks, Jackie Bucky Letney, Frederick Joseph Bain, Vanessa Orenz, Jennifer Casper Ross, Robbie Hurt, Unique Harris, Douglas Jones, Deborah Bowman, Bradley Brooks, Angela Green, Jody Husentrut, Brennan Smokey, Rouse Chapman, Marion Hurley, Gayla Shaper, Caleb Powell, Chelsea Cobo, Bonnie Santiago. Please do not forget these people. And please, if you have the time and passion, help one of these families find the answers they deserve. And that's the program. If you found it informative, please go to the app that you use to listen to Unfound and give this podcast a nice review. I thank you for listening. I'm Ed Densel, and you've been listening to Unfound.